Chapter 1291. 1936 Winter. The Duke of York, who had succeeded to the throne, and his wife, as well as his two daughters, Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, were hiding in Balmoral Castle from the Second World War. Princess Elizabeth was only 13 years old. The Duke of York was reading the newspaper in his hand. After a silent breakfast, the young and immature Princess Elizabeth suddenly said, "Father, are we going to hide here and do nothing?" The Duchess, the Queen, gave her a look of silence, but it didn't stop the young princess from speaking. "Our country's name is being sacrificed on the continent across the ocean, and we're enjoying the warmth of the fireplace in this castle. Elizabeth," the Queen's voice was slightly heavier, "don't add to your father's troubles." The Queen's tone was already stern, and the young princess could only reluctantly lower her head. As for the even younger Princess Margaret, at this moment, she was only hugging her doll and looking at all of this in horror. "Then, I'll go back to my room first." Princess Elizabeth stood up and left. "Elizabeth, have you forgotten the etiquette of royalty?" The Queen couldn't help but frown. The princess said calmly, "Mother, I want to learn fencing, horsemanship, and strategy, not to study Shakespeare's words." "You!" The Queen was furious. But at this moment, the new king, who had been silent for a long time, finally spoke. He put down the newspaper and spoke slowly. "Why, Elizabeth, you've reached the age where you should go to school. But considering the current situation, I've specially hired a tutor for you. Go, your tutor is waiting in the study. I hope you can show the etiquette that a royal princess should have and accept your new tutor." "I don't need a tutor, father. This is an order. This tutor will teach you." The new king looked at his eldest princess with a complicated expression. "You'll never know what price I paid to hire this tutor for you. Cherish it. This tutor will change your life, if you don't want to live a mediocre life." Although her conflicting emotions almost overcame her obedience to her father, the young princess was defeated by her mother's attack. She reluctantly came to the door of the study. She didn't yearn for the tutor that her father said was very powerful. She was thinking of how to make the tutor back off. Taking a deep breath, the young princess pushed open the door of the study and said loudly, "Where's the new tutor?" As she spoke, the princess observed the situation in the study. She expected the tutor to be someone who wore a pair of glasses and looked elegant or knowledgeable. Otherwise, it would be impossible for her father to hire him. However, the person who appeared in front of the princess wasn't a literary type, but a young woman. She had long golden hair, dark blue eyes, and a faint smile. You're my tutor?" The beautiful young woman didn't answer. She just picked up a heavy sword used for fencing from the table and threw it at the princess. The princess caught it in a hurry. While she was puzzled, the blonde woman in front of her picked up the same heavy sword and said indifferently, "In 10 minutes, if you can touch any part of my clothes, I'll leave here. How about it?" God! The princess didn't even know how the other party pulled out 2 heavy swords in the study. But that wasn't important. What was important was that fencing was something she loved. "No, I'll call for help." The princess's eyes suddenly became sharp. Memories flashed through her mind. The Queen, who had aged a long time ago, reached out and touched her cheek. It was cold and moist. "Little Elizabeth, long time no see, really. It's really you, Yi-sensei?" The Queen staggered forward step by step. "It's been so many years. Am I really seeing you again? But why haven't you changed at all, and I'm not young anymore? Please tell me this isn't a dream." Perhaps it was because of excitement, or perhaps it was because of joy. The old Queen couldn't help but reach out her hands, wanting to hold the face in front of her. Trembling. This should be a very touching scene. At least for the Queen, who was excited at this moment. The joy at this moment was comparable to the victory of the World War decades ago. This beautiful woman who changed her life. "Did I allow you to touch me, Elizabeth?" His deep blue eyes were just as deep as she remembered them, however. Upon hearing these cold words, Her Majesty seemed to have woken up in an instant. However, an almost instinctive fear still made Her Majesty, who had chatted and laughed with countless leaders and heads of state in the world without changing her expression, shiver. Her sword was very heavy, and the young princess had suffered unimaginable pain. At the same time, her pointer was just as heavy. It was like a nightmare that made the young princess unable to forget until she became the queen of a country. But this also made the queen completely wake up. After all, she wasn't the little girl who didn't know anything. Why, your appearance. Now you're the queen, and at the same time, you know the existence of the night mechanism. You know the extraordinary power in the world, don't you understand? The queen opened her mouth. This was a possibility she had never thought of. She needed some time to digest the information, and the room fell into silence. Miss Lancelot, how old are you this year? In her impression, this was the first time she encountered such a question. Of course, it wasn't that she had never encountered such a question before, it was just that she had never been asked this question from the beginning. There's no need to answer, she thought. 25. Her eyes suddenly changed at this moment, and keenly captured this moment of separation between thoughts and words. Lancelot's eyes suddenly became sharp, and a short sword slipped out from her sleeve. Wrong body. She had already appeared behind Boss Luo, and the short sword went over his shoulder and was placed on his neck. At the same time, her cold voice sounded, "What did you do to me? I think I really just asked a question." Luochu seemed to have a normal reaction, but he couldn't do it. Not to mention this short sword, even a sharper ice blade would not be able to cut through his skin. Moreover, it was unknown whether or not it would even be possible to cut through his skin. But if there really came a day when a sharp blade pierced into his body, he would also be reborn in the club. He had already tried to come back from the dead from the very beginning. Don't play tricks. Lancelot's voice became colder, the short sword was still held. Luochu smiled at this moment and calmly said, "It's so strange. Logically speaking, if I really made you feel danger, shouldn't you be more concerned about the situation in the room? After all, there are people you want to protect, and at the same time, there's also my companion who made you feel the danger approaching. Shouldn't it show that ensuring the safety of the person should be the first priority? Make a choice." It seemed to be this saying. Give up the controlled person to enter the room and deal with the current situation. Follow the queen's safety as the most important thing, or not give up controlling the opponent. She quickly made a choice. If your companions have really threatened my employer's safety, then all the more reason I shouldn't give up on you. At the very least, I should control you. Only then can we be considered on the same starting line, right? That's true. What made Lancelot surprised was that he agreed with her. What was more inconceivable was that he seemed to have concluded that she really wouldn't make a move. At this moment, he turned around. The short sword that was originally held on his neck had now become the tip of the sword that was pointed at his throat. 25 years. Luochu said casually. Actually, it's longer than my life. Miss Lancelot, in these 25 years, are there any memories worth remembering and treasuring? She couldn't help but frown. This was the second strange question. I think that you don't need to worry about whether or not there are any treasures in my memories. You should worry about yourself. She chose to make a move in her usual way. Of course, in order to ensure that the situation wouldn't worsen, she didn't intend to kill him, but she wanted to at least make him quiet down. His throat was a fatal place, so she didn't intend to attack. But other than that, perhaps his shoulders and thighs would be good targets to attack. At the very least, she wanted to impair his mobility. She only thought for a moment, and her body's movements were almost synchronized with her thoughts. The moment she came to a conclusion, Lancelot flicked her wrist and stabbed the short sword towards his shoulder blade. It should have been like this, but the short sword didn't move at all. It was as if it had stabbed into an invisible wall and was completely stable. It was more like a tightened screw that was fixed in the air. Lancelot was shocked and let go of the short sword. She instinctively retreated, but her body was unable to move, and the short sword was fixed in the air between her and Luocchio. Luocchio looked at Lancelot, then stretched out his hand and plucked the short sword from the air. He played with it in his hand, for now, I won't bring danger to the one in the room, including my companions. She naturally didn't believe him, and she didn't even let down her guard, at least, that was what her eyes showed. But at this time, the short sword in Luoccio's hand began to melt. It completely melted into a lump of molten steel, then it began to automatically stretch, twist, and change shape. Finally, it became a silver rose. If you don't have it, then start creating it now. If you already have it, I hope you can treasure it well. Luocchio returned the metal rose to Lancelot's hand. To be precise, it was inserted into her empty palm. She could move now. Lancelot's body moved at once. But at this time, the door suddenly opened. Miss Maid walked out with a smile, and Her Majesty the Queen sent her off in fear and trepidation. Yes, in fear and trepidation. Go back, Elizabeth. Don't ask too much about me. Remember my words. Yes. Her Majesty the Queen nodded. She really didn't ask more, even though she was very curious about the man who was Yu Ye's male companion. Of course, she also wanted to know why Lancelot had a metal rose in her hand at this time. You don't have to send me off, Miss Maid said again at this time. Her Majesty the Queen nodded. She looked like an obedient student, which made Lancelot feel even more incredible than Farrell's easy defeat last night. Luocchio didn't intend to talk to Her Majesty the Queen. He just nodded slightly. His arm bent slightly, and Yu Yi came to his side and held his hand. Well, the performance should start soon. Please allow us to leave first, madam. Luocchio concluded with this. Your Majesty the Queen, may I ask who they are? In front of the door, the mysterious man and woman had disappeared in the corridor, but Lancelot's doubts were obviously stronger. She began to doubt her own strength as a member of the Round Table 12. First, it was Farrell, then, unexpectedly, Her Majesty the Queen shook her head at this time. Lancelot, I hope you won't tell anyone about what happened today, about me and her. She frowned. But Her Majesty the Queen didn't want to say more. Instead, she looked at the metal rose in Lancelot's hand again and smiled. Oh, child, for the first time I feel that the flower suits you very well. Don't you think it would be better for you to change into a lady's dress? Without waiting for an answer, Her Majesty the Queen walked into the banquet with a chuckle. Lancelot looked at the metal rose in her hand. She was stunned. In the corridor, the boss and his female companion were still walking hand in hand. So this is what you meant when you said you had already taken your revenge. Boss Luo smiled at this time. It must have left a deep impression on Her Majesty the Queen's childhood. I suddenly want to see you as a strict teacher. It's just the request of the Duke of York. Miss Servant Girl smiled, but as a home teacher, I think it's a pass. The former New Orleans girl actually trained the Queen of Great Britain by herself. Luocchio shook his head. He didn't know who had such a bad taste. Miss Servant Girl didn't say anything about this. She smiled and said, Master, did you have a good chat with number 31? I hope she can wake up later. After all, this time, I didn't come to look for her specially. It's a coincidence to meet her. Luocchio muttered, Let's wait and see. After all, the boss who disturbs the employee's vacation will probably be hated. Then, cancel her right for the next vacation. Miss Servant Girl said lightly. Hey. Chapter 1292. Attentees. Due to the track malfunction, the Star of Europe will be suspended from now on. Passengers who have purchased tickets, please proceed. Attentees. They were suddenly in a mess as they made a ruckus in the waiting hall of the train station. How could this be? The orc girl looked at the translation software on her phone in surprise. She was preparing to log in to the Star of Europe as an extra method. She couldn't help but frown. Sister, what's going on? The orc girl didn't say anything. She just put on Olga's hood and quickly pulled him to a place where no one was around while explaining what happened. Malfunction? Olga was quite surprised when he heard the reason. He couldn't understand English, but he could see the time on the electronic clocks that were everywhere. Then let me see if there are any other routes. Don't worry, there will be a way. The orc girl comforted him softly. We can just wait until the repairs are done. This route won't be closed forever. Maybe it will be fine tomorrow. Although that was the case, she felt that it was quite dangerous to be chased by people in this foreign country for one more day. Other routes? Other than this underwater tunnel that crosses the ocean, where else could there be? Taking a boat? She didn't want to take a boat anymore. Not only was she traumatized after being caught by the orc traffickers, but she was also instinctively afraid of the ocean. She was an orc who couldn't swim and was afraid of water. As for the plane, obviously, it wasn't as convenient as taking the train. Let's leave here first. The orc girl pulled Olga and left the train station while the passengers were in a mess. The Queen's Theatre, Her Majesty the Queen's Banquet. Okay, I understand. After putting down the phone, Lancelot came to Her Majesty the Queen's side. Looking at Her Majesty, who seemed to be a little absent-minded at the moment, he said, "Mr. Hopkins called. The Knights organization in various places has successfully captured all the members of the Myth of Doomsday on the attack list obtained from Reed's mouth. Because it was deployed in advance, there was only 1 seriously injured and 4 lightly injured." That's good. Although she was absent-minded, Her Majesty had obviously received the message. She secretly heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. "Thank you for saving our country again." For this queen, although the current political system did not allow her to have the authority that a monarch should have, it was clear that she did not wish to become a monarch who was threatened by others and eventually divided the country, thus leaving a stain on her name. "I should reward the person who successfully captured Rend. Don't you think so, Lancelot?" The queen's mood seemed to have improved a lot. She even smiled more often. "Perhaps it would be better for you to discuss it with Mr. Hopkins," Lancelot said slowly. "Although we've arrested almost all the members of Mythical Doomsday who were active in our country, according to the intelligence, the leader of this organization and a few other key members have yet to show up. Therefore, this matter might not be over yet." Her Majesty seemed to have recalled the past. As she slowly combed her pet's fur, she said slowly, "In my life, I've seen many so-called revolutionary parties and underground organizations. They all have one thing in common. Do you know what it is?" She glanced at Lancelot, whose expression did not change at all. She smiled and said, "That is, they all value their companions very much. If Mr. Hopkins and the other people in charge of the Knights organization are smart, perhaps they can try to publicly execute these captured thugs." Lancelot opened her mouth slightly. She had been protecting the Queen closely for the past 2 years. Most of the time, the Queen had an amiable image, an image that her people needed. Even for Lancelot, who had known the Queen for such a long time, most of the time, the Queen was indifferent, as if she did not know anything and did not want to care about anything. However, after all, the Queen had experienced the baptism of war and was currently the longest-serving queen in the world. Oh, the show has finally begun. Her Majesty suddenly picked up the handheld glasses at this time. Finally, it's time. She seemed to be unwilling to continue the previous topic. Her interest had been attracted by the slowly rising curtain. Lancelot followed the Queen's gaze. While looking at the stage below, she subconsciously glanced at other places, but she did not see the mysterious man and woman. Behind the Queen, Lancelot took out the metal rose and fell into deep thought. At this time, it was quiet all around. On the stage, under the dim light, as the curtain rose, the low voice of the prologue slowly sounded. "Princess Tyrandot of the Xiong Kingdom, as beautiful as peach blossoms, as cold as frost. The prince of the royal family is obsessed with the love of beauty. A single woman with a heart of steel, testing the prince consort with 3 difficult questions, a butcher's knife flashing cold light. Different from the story of the brass band, the human voice, and the symphony orchestra on the stage, the back of the stage was much more chaotic. No matter the actors who were preparing to go on stage, the actors who had just stepped off the stage and were busy changing clothes, the staff responsible for props, or the backstage director, everyone was in an urgent and tense atmosphere. With the development of the plot, there were obviously more and more things that needed to be taken into consideration. Caesar? Caesar? Who can tell me where Caesar is? It's his turn to go on stage. Who can tell me where the missing male lead is? The manager of the troupe was as anxious as ants on a hot pan. Not to mention the usual situation, he would be furious when he couldn't find the actor before the performance, let alone this was the most important male lead role. What's more, Her Majesty the Queen of Britain was here today. If something went wrong, he would be fired as the manager. You didn't see him? Hurry up and bring him back. The manager of the troupe flew into a rage. 3 minutes. I'll only give you 3 minutes. If you can't find him, don't let him come back. Pasteur, get ready. If Caesar doesn't show up in 3 minutes, you replace him. You're the male lead tonight. Changing the lead actor at the last minute, and it was the most important male lead in the play, this was probably only slightly better than messing up the performance. The manager of the troupe kicked the prop clothes rack rather inelegantly. Why aren't you looking for it? Failure. Failure. Team annihilation. Failure on the screen of the mobile phone. Messages flooded in. They were all sent by the same name, Dobas. The man was silent from the beginning to the end. He was wearing an ancient Chinese costume with strong Western elements. Caesar. He was the actor of Khafra, the male lead of Turandot troupe. He was not the only one here. There was another old man in the same costume who was the actor of Prince Caliph's father. Caesar, Doba's information can't be wrong. We've failed this time. The old man's face was heavy. Sure enough, the night mechanism has pried open Reed's mouth. They already know everything about us. How did they pry open Reed's mouth in such a short time? He's the kind of guy who will keep the secret even if he dies. The man with flaxen hair. Caesar slowly put on his costume hat. He even prepared his makeup in front of the mirror. Let's prepare for the performance last time. Caesar. Most of our companions have been caught by the night mechanism. They may not keep their mouths shut. Look, even Reed's mouth was pried open. Our whereabouts may have been leaked. Retreat, Caesar. We can still accumulate strength and wait for the next opportunity. He had finished his makeup and stood up. Judas, do you know why the Queen suddenly came to this theater today? You have a backup plan? Under the old man's surprised gaze, Caesar pushed the door open and walked out. On the side of the stage, 3 minutes had passed. Under the anger of the troupe manager, the performance was delayed for another minute. There's no other way. Pasteur, get on the stage now. Don't mess up the performance, or I'll poke your ass with a wooden stick. The young man's face was as bitter as a bitter gourd after being squeezed with salt powder. He was even pushed by the troupe manager from behind. Wait. Caesar is here. Oh, my God, he's on the stage. This wasn't the Metropolis version of Turandot, so they didn't use the sea of people tactic. However, there were many actors on the stage. The lights moved to the center of the stage, and a handsome man slowly walked down from the stage steps. He became the focus of everyone's gazes. The music began to play under the conductor's baton. This was the first scene of Prince Caliph's appearance. It was about Prince Caliph's unexpected reunion with his old father in King's City. Under the dazzling lights, His Royal Highness sang slowly with a low voice that gradually rose to a high pitch. Disappear, the night. The stars were sinking, the stars were sinking. I'll win at dawn. I'll win. I'll win. The instrument stopped, and the conductor's baton froze in the air, as if it was difficult to wave it. The performance of the orchestra also stopped. Under the surprised gaze of the audience, Only the solo of the handsome man under the stage lights could be heard. This is the last part of No One Sleeps Tonight? Is Caesar crazy? The theater manager froze as if he had been struck by lightning. This guy didn't follow the script. Instead, he sang the last few songs. He felt the world was spinning. He didn't know how to deal with this sudden crisis. Oh my God, Pastu, knock me out with your wooden stick. Where did I get the wooden stick? Lancelot, tell me, did I miss the first part of the song? If I'm not senile, this should be the last song. During the banquet, the queen put down her glasses in surprise and looked back blankly, only to find that her guardian knight wasn't listening to the performance attentively. She just looked at the metal rose in her hand silently, as if she was absent-minded. What should I say? Different from the temporary confusion of the audience, Boss Luo, who was sitting in a corner of the public seats, blinked and then turned to look at his maid. Is it really not suitable for me to walk around? The servant girl didn't have much expression on her face. She just looked at the stage with her eyes moving slightly. But at this moment, a lot of smoke suddenly appeared around the stage. It wasn't special smoke, but a substance that would make people unconscious after inhaling it. The audience in the front row had inadvertently inhaled the gas and fell down on their seat. At this moment, people began to panic. They stood up in horror, pushing each other and screaming in horror. However, not only under the stage, but also at the ventilation ducts around the stage, the fainting gas also came out. The audience fell down one by one. On the stage, the actors had already fainted, including the people on both sides of the stage. At this moment, only the actor who played Prince Caliph and the old man who played the prince's father were still standing among the many people who had fallen down. He was still singing loudly. Fate is as changeable as the moon, alternating between full and empty. The abominable life intertwines misery and happiness. No matter poor or rich, they all melt and disappear like ice and snow. The terrible and empty wheel of fate you turn mercilessly. You are vicious and cruel, destroying all the happiness and beautiful expectations. The shadow shrouds the blurred, and you also knock me down. Disaster comes, and my back is mercilessly crushed by you. Fate destroys my health and will, mercilessly strikes, brutally oppresses, and enslaves me. At this moment don't hesitate. For the most senseless warrior who has been beaten down by fate, let the strings of the harp resound, and weep with me in sorrow. Stop. His voice echoed in the theater. The thick fog slowly sank, then diluted in the air and gradually dissipated. Caesar slowly sighed. Suddenly, a clear round of applause rang out in the deathly silent theater. Everyone should have fainted. At the moment of applause, both Caesar and the old man beside him, Judas, looked at the direction of the applause in surprise. On the seats of the stairs, among the people who had fallen down, they could see two people sitting in their seats. Sober, the applause came from one of the sober young men. Luocio's hands. It wasn't just to attract the attention of the singer on the stage. Boss Luo's applause stopped after a while. Excuse me, is there anything else? Chapter 1293. When the song came, in the smog, in the audience where the queen was sitting, Lancelot immediately pulled the queen back. At the same time, she quickly took out a handkerchief and wet it with red wine. Cover your mouth and nose, it's better than nothing. Lancelot quickly said, and then rushed out of the door, but she closed the door almost instantly and returned to the queen's side. Outside. The queen was not too anxious, but she quickly asked. They were knocked to the ground. Lancelot frowned and carelessly stroked his palm across his chest, to check on the divine armor's recovery. It's not fully recovered, at most, it only has basic combat power. She walked to the audience again and saw that the whole place was covered by the thick smog. She could faintly hear the high-pitched song from the smog. At the same time, the phone signal was blocked. The sound of cutting was suddenly heard. Lancelot turned around and protected the queen behind her. The door in front of her was cut into several pieces, and then fell down. A black-haired woman wearing a purple leather jacket, who seemed to be of Asian descent, slowly walked in. The woman's left and right hands were holding a foot-long short sword. At the same time, there was a thin and long scar on the left side of her face. It seems that this was premeditated. The Queen frowned. It seems that, among my staff, there are people who were bribed by you, right? As expected of your Majesty, you thought of the answer so quickly. The woman in purple who was holding two short swords smiled. In that case, your Majesty, you might as well not resist. This way, I will have a lot of time left. You are a member of mythology of Doomsday? Lancelot asked coldly. After noticing the scar on the woman's face that ruined her beauty, Lancelot quickly found out the woman's origin from the intelligence. You are a senior member of mythology of Doomsday, Nicomeda, Catherine? You've answered correctly. Then I'll reward you later. The purple-clothed woman, Catherine, narrowed her eyes slightly. Lancelot maintained her composure and said, "As long as you think you can defeat me." She waved her arm and a beam of light slowly emerged from the center of her palm. Shockingly, it was a silver-black longsword. However, there were many cracks on the longsword's blade, as if it would shatter at any moment. I can't say for the other 12 knights, but if it's you... Catherine chuckled. She gained the upper hand by a show of strength. She lowered her body and sprinted forward. However, this speed was clearly not something that Lancelot was afraid of. In fact, it could even be said that this speed was slow. The longsword in Lancelot's hand easily deflected the opponent's dagger and stabbed towards the opponent's chest. However, what left Lancelot at a loss was that the sword in her hand, which was forged together with the holy armor, actually shattered the moment it was about to pierce into the opponent's body. It shouldn't be. Even if it wasn't completely repaired, at least in terms of strength, it should be stronger than a standard sword in perfect condition. At the moment when the sword shattered, Lancelot's reaction was also extremely fast. Once again, the shattered sword reformed. It was still a sword full of cracks. However, this time, Catherine didn't even move, allowing Lancelot's sword to stab towards her body. The sword shattered once again. Lancelot looked at the sword that had shattered twice in disbelief. Finally, she couldn't maintain a calm expression on her face. "Don't you find it strange that this indestructible lake light has no effect on me?" Catherine smiled slightly. "No matter how many times, your weapon can't hurt me. Do you believe it?" "You? What are you wearing?" Lancelot took a deep breath. Finally, with her sharp sense of magic, she finally noticed that Catherine seemed to be wearing something. It was this thing that blocked the attack of the indestructible lake light. Catherine said softly, "Holy armor, Guinevere's repentance." As she said, a gray robe appeared on Catherine's body. It looked like a nun's costume. "It really exists." Lancelot looked at her in disbelief, finally showing a frightened expression. "As the relic of his beloved woman. I ask this sinner, how can he hurt it?" Catherine sneered. "You can't use the power of the Knights of the Round Table. How much power do you have left?" "It's enough to deal with you." The female knight suddenly waved her hand again. Since it was a spiritual equipment that could restrain her holy armor, then she didn't need to use the power of holy armor. However, after this attack, Lancelot had a feeling of wanting to die. What she waved was the short sword that she should have carried with her as a backup, but what she waved was an ornament that was molded into a metal rose. The scene was silent. Catherine was stunned. She stared blankly at Lancelot, who was pointing the metal rose at her, looking valiant and heroic. Both sides were silent for a while. "It looks like you really think that I'm easier to deal with." Catherine woke up from her daze, and there was a surge of anger in her heart from being underestimated. "I don't have time to play games with you here." While Lancelot was distracted, she dodged and took advantage of the moment. Catherine appeared from the Queen's shadow like a ghost. The ice blade in her hand was directly placed on the Queen's shoulder. At the same time, she whispered in the Queen's ear, "Don't move. Otherwise, perhaps the Crown Prince will inherit the throne tomorrow." I think that he will be very happy to do so. I think so too, Miss Catherine. The Queen gave Lancelot a look, indicating that she should not act rashly. The truth was, this female knight was in a state of shock, so she had no choice but to give up resisting. Nicomedes smiled in satisfaction. She glanced at the bottom of the stands. The smoke was starting to fall and slowly dissipate. Coincidentally, the song also stopped at this moment. But there was still applause. The drug did not take effect? The same question appeared in the minds of Caesar and Judas. Judas, who was playing the role of the prince's father, took off his robe, revealing a body of strong muscles that did not match his old face. Of course, the white beard that almost reached his chest was not a prop. He even took out a pair of boxing gloves from his waist and put them on. However, Caesar suddenly reached out and stopped him. Caesar shook his head slightly at Judas and walked down the stage. His gaze changed as he walked, but his eyes never left the applauding young man. At the same time, he said slowly, Madeira stun potion, even if only 1 gram of it is diluted, it can make 10 elephants unconscious in an instant. Ordinary people may not be able to resist it. I'm curious. There seems to be some accidents in this performance. The smoke has a name? Luaccio asked curiously. Boss Luo's concept of medicine had always been limited to the commonly used medicines that could be bought in pharmacies. Miss Maid looked at the leading actor who was slowly walking up and said indifferently, Madeira coma potion, standard amount, 30 grams of ground grass worm corpse powder, 15 grams of two-ear grass, 10 grams of venomous snake tooth. Rattlesnake tooth is best, 78 grams of mugwort, and 1 standard amount of armadillo bile. In addition, a standard dose of daisy root, fig peel, and leech juice. However, the person who made this potion was lazy and did not use rattlesnake tooth, so the potion was reduced by at least 20%. Caesar, who was walking up the stairs, froze on the first step. He couldn't go down. At the same time, an exclamation came from above the stage. How did you do it? I only used an ordinary snake tooth. A figure jumped down from above the stage. It was a thin and gloomy man with round-rimmed glasses. This is only the cheapest secret potion. An apprentice should be able to make it. Is it difficult to analyze it? Miss Maid said indifferently. You said I'm not even as good as an apprentice? The skinny man was enraged, but Judas, who was beside him, grabbed his collar with one hand and pulled. At the same time, he covered the man's mouth. Boss Luo was still rubbing Miss Maid's fingers under his seat, as if praising her profound knowledge. But considering that Miss Maid had her own private laboratory before meeting him, it was understandable. I didn't expect that there would be a secret pharmacist who left here. Caesar pondered for a moment and asked tentatively, Madam, are you a member of the Magicians' Association? He knew that the Magicians' Association had members all over the Eurasian continent, especially the secret pharmacists. Many of them were eccentric people. He had to pay attention to the Magicians' Association. Due to the referendum in Great Britain a few years ago, there was a subtle situation between countries. The Magicians' Association, which had a huge influence in Eurasian continent, made some decisions to resist Great Britain. However, the two sides hadn't reached the point of breaking off relations. After all, there were many certified members of the Magicians' Association in Great Britain. Therefore, it wasn't strange to meet a magician or a secret pharmacist in Great Britain. The strange thing was meeting one here, or maybe two. Caesar's eyes quickly turned from Miss Maid to Luaccio. Your Excellency, you are? Caesar stared at him. Luaccio looked around at the people who were just unconscious but not injured. He smiled and said, If you don't mind, it's best to treat me as an innocent passerby involved in this incident. In fact, I prefer to have a peaceful day. Peaceful? Caesar nodded. I'm sorry, it seems that our actions today have disturbed you. If you want, you can leave. He made a gesture of invitation, pointing to the exit. Then let's go. Luaccio nodded and stood up. He stretched out his hand gracefully, allowing Miss Maid to hold his hand and stand up. There are many performances in the West District today. It shouldn't be boring. Miss Maid lifted her skirt and put her hand on his. Lucio looked at Caesar. Actually, today is my first time to listen to an opera. There are many parts one don't understand. But I like your voice. If there's a chance, I hope to see you perform on the stage. Your Excellency, what's your name? Caffra. Lucio was stunned. This was the name of the male lead of Trafford. He nodded. Okay, I'll remember it. Then, I hope you can find your princess, Prince Caffra. Caesar's gaze flickered as he watched the couple walk towards the exit along the stairs. Behind him, Jodas quickly ran up, together with the skinny man who was refining the secret medicine. The skinny man said angrily, "Leader, are you going to let them go? They saw us. I'll chase after them." As he spoke, the skinny man looked as if he was about to pass Caesar. Unexpectedly, Caesar suddenly stretched out his hand and lightly slapped behind him. The skinny man's body instantly flew out, all the way until he landed on the stage. He painfully got up and said incredulously, "Leader, are you crazy?" "Caesar?" Judas obviously didn't know why Caesar suddenly hit his men. He frowned. Caesar shook his head. "You can't go up." As for the reason, Caesar took a deep breath, then clenched his fist and punched. His fist seemed to hit something. A loud sound like an explosion was heard. It was so loud that the dust on the ceiling was shaken off. Something was blocking here. Judas looked at it in horror, then tentatively stretched out his hand. An invisible wall stood in front of them, completely separating the theater into two halves. "What kind of power is this?" Judas murmured. He opened Caesar's fist. Bloody fist. He knew that Caesar's punch was not a test, but a real one. At least, there is no malice in his eyes. Caesar was silent for a while. He is a very strange person. At first glance I felt a kind of kindness. Kindness? Caesar shook his head. Maybe only when you face him, you will understand what happened. At this moment, a woman's voice rang out. At the bottom of the stairs, Caesar could be seen holding Her Majesty hostage and rushing out quickly. As for Lancelot, his hands were shackled, and he was the first to follow behind with an unfriendly expression. The shackles were obviously specially made and were tools specifically used to lock up Transcendent. I heard a loud sound. "Caesar, what happened to your hand?" Seeing that Caesar's hand was injured, Catherine immediately let go of Her Majesty. Fortunately, the skinny man beside her was shocked and quickly replaced her, but he was still flustered and exasperated. "Catherine, do you know what you are doing?" Catherine ignored him and quickly walked to Caesar's side, holding his bleeding hand. Without thinking, she unzipped her leather jacket, tore her underwear, and wrapped the wound. "Who can hurt you?" He did it himself. Judas shook his head. What happened just now? How could he tell Catherine? Probably no one would believe him. She was late for half a minute, and everyone might have floated back from the brink of death. "Caesar?" Catherine frowned. Caesar waved his hand, shook his head slightly, and then walked to Her Majesty the Queen. Standing in front of Her Majesty, Caesar said indifferently, "It's the first time we meet, Your Majesty. Please come with us." Her Majesty the Queen said slowly, "I am just an old woman. Even if you kidnap me, you may not be able to do what you want to do. The ending may not be good." Caesar said, "It's better than no ending." Then he waved his hand. "Sorry to offend you." Judas immediately covered Her Majesty the Queen and Lancelot with a black cloth bag. Caesar looked back at the stage one last time and recalled the mysterious young man's words when he left. Subconsciously, under the stage lights that were still on, he seemed to see a woman singing a solo in the moonlight. Tarandit, in order to avoid trouble. When they walked out of the theater, the security guards outside the door and the government security personnel waiting outside the theater were in a state of invisible state. On the street, Lucio was looking for other theaters, wanting to see if there were any that hadn't started yet. "Master, Lancelot seems to have been taken away. Don't you care? Miss Servant Girl suddenly asked at this time. Luocchio thought for a while and said, during the vacation, Black Soul should be isolated from the shop. No matter if they encounter dangerous things or not, they won't get help from the shop. I remember there is such a rule. Because this is a part of the life that Black Soul bought. Miss Servant Girl nodded slightly. The 7th rule of the vacation regulations, the 3rd rule. Luocchio stopped and laughed. Actually, you want to attack the people of the myth of Doomsday? Hearing this, Miss Servant Girl raised her head and suddenly said, Master, can I stand on top of the dictionary for 10 days as a punishment, and then erase this organization? Stand on top of the dictionary for 10 days. What kind of punishment is that? Luocchio didn't say anything, but kissed her directly. She also responded, with her hands around Luoccio's waist, hugging gently. Beautiful lady, are you in a good mood? When they separated, Boss Luo said softly, I hope there won't be a third time. In fact, Luocchio felt quite strange. It seemed that he was raised into a useless person by Miss Servant Girl, and then he raised her into a qualified lover. A Miss Servant Girl who could act like a spoiled child was also very good. Genius remembered this site's address in a second. Mobile version of reading website. Chapter 1294. The incident at Her Majesty's Theatre was sent to both the government and the night organization at the same time. Both parties were furious at the same time. Especially the night organization. They originally thought that they had at least temporarily resolved the danger of the myth of Doomsday, but unexpectedly, the other party took drastic measures and was forcibly taken away from the theatre by Her Majesty the Queen. This news was also blocked by the government at once. Currently, the audience in the theatre was temporarily placed in the lounge and lobby of the theatre, and at the same time, all means of communication were requested to be cut off. The police arrived first, and then the people from the Military Intelligence Department. Finally, Gareth, who had just completed his mission on the Eurostar train track, also brought a team of people to the scene personally. Who are they? One of the policemen couldn't help but ask his companions in surprise. Just 10 minutes ago, they had directly made way for the people from the Military Intelligence Department. But now, it was the people from the Military Intelligence Department's turn to make way for this group of people. How would I know? His companion shook his head and looked at the people from the Military Intelligence Department with some disbelief. They seemed to be rather indignant that they were invited by this group of people. The theater where the incident happened was blocked by this group of people. At this time, in the theater, Mr. Gareth stood in the room that the Queen used to watch the show. He had already discovered that there were traces of a fight here, but after the wood was cut, the traces of a fight in the room were not heavy. The fight didn't seem to have lasted very long. Or was it one-sided? But the one guarding the Queen was Lancelot. Who could easily suppress Lancelot? Gareth was more and more puzzled. Even if she had been injured by Farrell last night, Lancelot shouldn't have been unable to fight back in England. He and the clown, Dagonite, were actually less injured than Lancelot. His and the clown's holy armor was broken by Farrell before it could be deployed, so the holy armor wasn't too damaged. But Lancelot was forcibly destroyed by Farrell after putting on the holy armor. At this time, a knight called from below the stage. He seemed to have discovered something. Mr. Gareth simply jumped down from the stands. He saw the knight come over with a middle-aged man. Mr. Snake. Gareth greeted the middle-aged man politely. He was a magician hired by the Knight Organization. Although he was also a member of the Magician Association, he had been a Briton for generations. After he was certified by the Magician Association, he had always stayed in Britain. Mr. Gareth. Mr. Snakel nodded. I found some remnants of the secret medicine at the scene. I've also tested the samples collected from the audience. It's the same substance. This is a kind of poison that causes people to faint instantly, but it's harmless. Secret apothecary. Gareth frowned. According to the information we have, There is indeed a senior cadre who is a secret apothecary in the myth of Doomsday. What's his name again? Tipu. Mr. Snakel said calmly. Also, he's actually not a secret apothecary, because he was suspected of cheating and poisoning the examiner during the secret apothecary certification process. The Magicians Association has permanently stripped him of his qualification as a certified secret apothecary. At this time, another knight walked over quickly. Mr. Gareth, we've investigated everything. Other than the disappearance of the Queen and Lady Lancelot, there are only 2 actors from the troupe. Actors? Gareth frowned. The knight said, one of them is called Caesar, the actor who played the male lead. The other one is called Judas, also an important character in the drama, Caesar. Gareth said the name subconsciously. Sir, have you thought of anything? Gareth shook his head. No. I don't have a clue. Oh right, Mr. Snakel, can we use tracking magic? No. Mr. Snakel shook his head. I didn't find any useful medium here. I can't use tracking magic. Sorry. Don't mind it. Gareth patted his shoulder, but he was at a loss. At this time, the phone rang. It was a call from the Knights organization. Gareth picked up the call immediately, then his expression changed slightly. Really? What? 1 day's time, before dawn tomorrow? Number 10 Downing Street. He was so angry that he suppressed the urge to smash the phone. Hopkins, I hope you're just playing a bad joke on me. I think I also want to be in the mood to play such a bad joke on you. But it's not like that. Prime Minister. Mr. Hopkins's voice sounded somewhat helpless. Just a quarter of an hour ago, the Knight Agency received a notice from the leader of Myth of Doomsday. The content was as follows. First, release all members of Myth of Doomsday unconditionally. Second, pass the request for the cession of Northern Ireland before sunrise tomorrow. If not, at sunrise tomorrow, they will publicly execute Her Majesty the Queen. What a joke! Can't the entire British Empire deal with a few thugs? The Prime Minister roared. Mr. Hopkins, I really want to know if the annual funds allocated to the Knight Agency for so many years have been spent on King pigs. In the Knight Agency, Mr. Hopkins took the phone away from his ear. He was annoyed, so he was not in the mood to listen to the man in number 10 Downing Street roaring. The Prime Minister was only worried about Her Majesty the Queen being threatened, but Mr. Hopkins was also worried about Farrell's prison break. I won't trust you any more, Hopkins, he suddenly said coldly and hung up the phone. Mr. Hopkins couldn't help but have an ominous feeling. He silently looked at the pendulum clock on the wall. There were only about 14 hours until sunrise tomorrow. He sighed, stood up, and turned around. The hanging pictures on the wall behind him automatically moved away, revealing a huge screen. The screen turned on, and on the screen, 7 faces appeared at the same time. These were the people in charge of the Knight Agency. Everyone, the situation is already like this. We need to know the Queen's whereabouts immediately. If we allow the enemy to publicly execute Her Majesty this time, it will be the most terrifying and ridiculous joke in the history of our country. Speak, Hopkins, what is your decision? Mr. Hopkins took a deep breath and said seriously, activate the Holy Grail. On the screen, everyone instantly fell silent. A strange aura, even through the screen, seemed to slowly fill the air due to the conversation between the 8 people at the head of the meeting. Finally, on the screen, an old man slowly said, Hopkins, you should know that the Holy Grail is a trophy seized from the war 100 years ago. But it is forbidden to be used. Using the Holy Grail requires a sacrifice, don't you know? Tomorrow we may see a country in chaos. Mr. Hopkins sighed, so? I, Hopkins Pendragon, the descendant of the great King Arthur, will use the absolute command once, and ask the Knight Agency to obey one of my orders. Hopkins, are you serious? Everyone on the screen was shocked. Hopkins, the absolute command is an honor bestowed by the Knight Agency to the descendant of King Arthur. You can only use it twice in your life. Mr. Hopkins didn't speak, but slowly unscrewed the silver carving on his wristband. After unscrewing the silver carving, there was a mechanism inside. From a small gap below the carving, a gem slipped out. Mr. Hopkins held this gem high. The people in charge of the night agency on the screen all stood up at this time. Yes, I have decided, Mr. Hopkins slowly said, with this as the proof of the royal power. I will use the absolute command once. Yes, Your Majesty. This was probably a place similar to a prison, and it was made of stone, which seemed to be quite old. Her Majesty didn't know where she was finally sent to. When she opened the black cloth bag, she was already in this place. At the same time, Lancelot was also locked in this place. I'm sorry, I didn't do my job well. Lancelot slightly lowered her head. I let you be in such a vicious environment. Her Majesty didn't panic as Lancelot imagined, but looked around the stone room. The only light was an oil lamp put down by the hijackers. This was a stone room, about the size of a bungalow. In fact, it's already very good, at least there's a place to sit, but they took away my pet, which I can't accept. Her Majesty smiled and sat down. The chair was made of wood, so it was obviously not very comfortable. Lancelot frowned. The Queen's calmness was out of her expectation. Your Majesty, aren't you afraid? Her Majesty smiled. I'm afraid, but I'm afraid of the future, not the current prison. You're a great person, Lancelot suddenly said after a moment of silence. Her Majesty slightly shook her head. She could still bear this kind of suffering. Back in the day, she had been locked in a place even narrower than this stone room. Not only was she hungry and cold, but there was also no light. For 3 days and 3 nights, she was almost going crazy under the punishment of that respectable yet terrifying tutor. Compared to the punishment she received when she was young because she couldn't meet the tutor's requirements, this stone room was really nothing. On the snowy grassland, she stood barefoot with a thick dictionary, maintaining a lady's posture. She was forced to master French within a month, and almost half of her time was spent on transcribing, and she still had to maintain a gentle smile. It was really nothing, this sure city. But you, Lancelot, are you afraid? Her Majesty came back from her memories, looking at this young woman, and asked softly. Lancelot directly shook her head. To become a knight, the first thing to do is to overcome the fear brought by danger. The Queen shook her head. Child, listen to me. Right now, you are just like me. We are both imprisoned here, ordinary people who have lost their powers. I am not the Queen here, and you can't use any power here. It's not shameful to admit your fear. Lancelot was startled, and then frowned. I'm worried about what they're going to do next. You've been kidnapped. Once this matter is exposed, the outside world will inevitably fall into panic. Her Majesty suddenly interrupted Lancelot. Lancelot, when did you become a knight? Me? She opened her mouth. This queen didn't seem to be worried about her situation at all. Her Majesty folded her hands on her thighs. At this time, her sitting posture was still elegant, as if she was sitting on a noble throne instead of an inferior wooden stool. We can't change our current situation for the time being. Her Majesty chuckled. Generally speaking, at this time, what we need to do is to change our bad mood. Chatting is obviously a very good way. My female knight. I want to check the environment here. She obviously couldn't agree, and after a quick reply, she began to check the walls of the stone room. Inch by inch, she tapped it with her fingers. Her Majesty looked at it, gently shook her head, and then slowly closed her eyes. Did they agree? In the room, the skinny man with glasses. Tipu quickly stood up, because at this time, Judas had just come back from outside. And Judas's mission was to send the notice of the leader to the night mechanism. Judas looked at Tipu angrily, rolled his eyes and said, I'm threatening you to die now. Do you want to think about it? Shaking his head, Judas ignored Thep, who he had just insulted, and quickly walked to the side of Caesar, the leader. I've received news from Dobas that the people in charge of the 7 major knight organizations from all over the country are rushing to the Fog City at almost the same time. The Knights of the Round Table, who are currently in charge, will probably gather in an hour. Isn't this to be expected? The one who spoke was Catherine, who was treating Caesar's wound. She didn't know what was wrong with the wound. Although the bleeding had stopped, it still couldn't heal. This was very incredible. Whether it was Catherine or Judas, they were very clear about how strong Caesar's body was. That's it, Catherine. At this time, Caesar withdrew his hand from Catherine's hand. As long as it doesn't bleed, this wound won't be a problem. He stood up and began to put on his coat at the same time, and asked, Dobas, haven't you found the news of the Soul Witch? That bitch. Catherine snorted coldly. Since the accident, she hasn't appeared. She is not on our side. Caesar shook his head and said casually, If we are not on the same side, most of the myth of Doomsday is not on our side. They are just free members. Since we can't find her, then forget it. What we need to do is to wait for tomorrow's sunrise. They won't find this place, don't worry. Judas nodded. As long as they can't find this place before dawn. Genius remembered the address of this station in a second. Mobile version reading website. Chapter 1295. Lancelot had already knocked on every inch of the stone room's wall, but she still could not find anything that could help her escape. Lancelot sighed silently, then glanced at the queen who was resting with her eyes closed. Could it be that there was nothing else she could do other than maintain her physical strength? She looked at the shackles on her body helplessly. This was a tool that could imprison power. Even so, the shackles could not suppress the power inside the holy armor. Calculating the time, the self-repair of the holy armor should be completed soon. The key was how to break the shackles on her hand. Also, how to deal with the holy armor on Catherine Nicomeda, Guinevere's repentance. Lancelot du Lake, the first generation of the Knights of the Round Table, once fell in love with King Arthur's queen, Guinevere. In the end, it led to a tragic ending of Love is a Ray of Light. The result was that King Arthur died in the Battle of the Sword Fence, and the queen entered the monastery to repent. As for the first generation of Lancelot, she did not see her lover again until she died. Legend had it that the holy armor, Guinevere's repentance, had the ability to completely restrain the holy armor of Lancelot du Lake and the indestructible light of the lake. It only had this one special ability, and other than that, it could not even compare to the golden armor of the Grand Knight. It was not that the person who made the holy armor deliberately added such an ability, but it was just a vow that the first generation of Lancelot made to her own sword before she died. Never hurt Guinevere. Later, it evolved into a situation where the indestructible light of the lake could not attack the holy armor, Guinevere's repentance, which was the so-called complete restraint. But the holy armor also disappeared with Guinevere's death in the monastery. Although the descendants of the knights of the past had been trying to find the whereabouts of this legendary holy armor, they had not found a single clue until now. Why would it appear in the hands of the myth of Doomsday? This question had been lingering in Lancelot's mind. She had a high compatibility with Lancelot du Lake, and she was the one who could exert the most power of the holy armor among all the knights of the Round Table. But apart from that, her physical ability was far inferior to that of the clown, and her swordsmanship was also incomparable to Gareth's. Each of the 12 Round Tables had their own specialties, but she was the only one who was mediocre in every aspect. Did you have a good rest, ladies? Just as she was deep in thought, a voice suddenly came from outside the stone room. As the stone door opened, the light suddenly increased, and 3 figures appeared at the door at the same time. One of them was the wielder of the holy suit, Catherine. As for the other 2, they were Caesar and Judas. The queen, who was resting on the stool with her eyes closed, slowly opened her eyes. At this time, Catherine and Judas walked in at the same time, and directly came in front of Lancelot. Her body's power had been restrained, and she could not summon the power of the holy armor, not to mention Catherine, who was completely restrained, so now she could only helplessly give up resistance. Very obedient, Catherine chuckled. I thought you would conjure up another rose. Faced with such ridicule, Lancelot wanted to dig a hole and bury herself. She just pretended not to hear and frowned. You kidnapped the queen, what do you want to do? No one answered her question, and Caesar just waved his hand, and Catherine and Judas took Lancelot out of the stone room at the same time. Before leaving, Caesar glanced at Lancelot and said indifferently, We will meet again later. After the two escorted Lancelot away, Caesar walked slowly to the queen. He took out a pocket watch from his clothes and looked at the time. It is now 7:13 in the evening, Your Majesty. I am sorry to have made you spend 2 hours and 7 minutes in such a bad environment. The queen smiled and said, So, don't you want to use dinner to make up for your apology? Sorry, if it's food, someone will send it later. Caesar was slightly surprised. This queen seemed to be a little different from the rumors outside. The queen sat up straight. My physical strength is not as good as before, so I kidnapped you, sir. Please allow me to sit and talk to you. It's okay, I will leave soon. Caesar nodded. The queen smiled and said, I think it's about time you came to see me. Are you going to tell me the intention behind this kidnapping and how to deal with me? Caesar didn't say anything, but just walked around the queen slowly, and then calmly told her his request to the Knight Organization and the British government. When she heard that she would be publicly executed, Her Majesty frowned imperceptibly, but she covered it up very well, as if she was mocking herself. It seems that in addition to the title of the longest reigning queen, I have to add one more title. The first queen to be publicly executed in modern times? I have so many titles that there is no place to engrave them on my tombstone. I am curious, you don't seem to be afraid at all. Caesar looked at her and said, Is it the message from the government, or the certainty of the Knight Organization that you will be rescued? The queen laughed and said, I am already at this age. In the next few years, no matter what day I am suddenly taken away from this world, it is not necessarily strange. Can I ask you a question? Go ahead. Caesar nodded. You have this right, Your Majesty. The queen looked up. Why do you want to become independent of Northern Ireland? Because we need a country, Caesar said calmly. What do you need a country for? The queen continued to ask. Survival. Without the soil for you to survive. In that soil there are people who enslave, capture, cruelly kill, oppress, and humiliate us. So you use such a radical method? So you use such a last resort? If you really become independent, what do you plan to do next? We will send an invitation to all our kind in the world. They can live freely in this country. Maybe there will be war next. We have seen too much blood, we are not afraid of war. Sir, do you have children? Yes. Is it also for your children? Yes. I hope you can succeed. I will. It was still a prison cell made of stone, but this was not a simple prison cell, it was a place where a large number of torture instruments were placed. Right here, Lancelot's hands were locked and hung from the ceiling with an iron chain. She was almost standing on her toes. Catherine was looking at her with a playful expression. Have you never thought that as a noble knight of the Round Table, you would be treated like this one day? Catherine pinched Lancelot's chin and asked with a smile. Are you going to torture me? Lancelot said coldly. Why would I torture you? Catherine suddenly narrowed her eyes. Compared to torture, isn't it better to do something more interesting to you? As she said, just as Lancelot was surprised, Catherine directly kissed her lips. Lancelot's cheeks were pinched, so she could only open her mouth and let the other's tongue freely invade her mouth. The moment the female knight was violated, she was almost in a state of shock. When the soft thing rolled around in her body, the moment the touch began to spread from the cerebral cortex like a slight paralysis, she remembered that she should resist. However, at the moment when she was angry and wanted to bite off the other's tongue, Catherine had already let go of the intersection. The sparkling and translucent crystal thread began to stretch between the two of them before finally breaking apart. Miss Catherine laughed jokingly. What a childish kissing technique! I have seen your profile. You are 25 years old. Haven't you experienced a man? Do you want to be like the Holy Maiden and always be pure? What did you feed me? Lancelot only felt something sliding down her throat. This was something that was forcibly put into her mouth when the other party violated her. A kind of parasitic imprint worm. This is a filthy thing that a magician family in East Asia has studied for nearly half a century. As for its function, you will know soon. As Lancelot was saying, Catherine violently tore her collar. The white shirt collar was torn to the chest, and the buttons fell to the ground. Her white shirt was finally completely torn apart, revealing her body with only underwear. Her towering breasts and her well-trained lower abdomen with clear abdominal contours. Catherine's finger pointed at Lancelot's throat and slowly slid down from there. I heard that even those who inherit the Knights of the Round Table are not able to fully utilize the power of the inheritance. Generally, they can only reach the initial fusion stage, which is unable to fully fuse with the holy armor. They need to wear at least a part of the holy armor on their body to be able to activate its power. Only those who reach the second stage can achieve the level of fusion. At this time, the holy armor and the knight's body have already merged into one, and will not fall off unless they die. Her finger finally stopped at Lancelot's abdomen. At this moment, Lancelot suddenly felt an intense cramping pain coming from her abdomen. This degree of pain even made her break out in a cold sweat in an instant. Her breathing was rapid. She really wanted to cry out in pain. Looks like it is starting to take effect. Catherine narrowed her eyes at this time. The holy seal of the 12 Round Table, Lancelot du Lake. A golden seal slowly appeared on Lancelot's abdomen at this time. This is your plan. Lancelot endured the pain. To deprive me of my power? This is just the beginning. Catherine smiled. She did not take any further action against Lancelot, but slowly stepped back, until she reached the door. When the door of the stone room opened, outside the door, Caesar came. Caesar glanced at the situation in the stone room and asked directly, "Are you ready?" Catherine wrapped her arms around Caesar's neck and leaned her body against his. She blinked and said, "How are you going to reward me? Are you going to marry me?" Caesar asked suddenly. "What?" Catherine was suddenly startled. At the moment when she was distracted, Caesar released her hand and walked directly to Lancelot. Catherine's face flashed with ecstasy at this time, and then she followed him. The effect of the seal worm is very good. It seems that this Japanese magician family is really capable. The holy seal will be temporarily peeled off from her body soon. Feeling this man's gaze on her, Lancelot could not help but shudder. This man's eyes seemed to be desolate. You are their leader?" Lancelot asked weakly. Every second of the holy seal peeling off was extremely painful. "My name is Caesar," Caesar said slowly, "but in your information, there may only be the name Oberon." "Caesar?" Lancelot frowned. Catherine smiled and said, "To be precise, Caesar, the descendant of the elf king, Oberon, born by Julius Caesar and the legendary witch Morgan Le Fay." "Legendary witch, Morgan." Lancelot's face showed a trace of horror. "Could it be, just as you think, it is the man that your knight organization first called the king, the half-sister witch Morgan? So strictly speaking, he also has part of King Arthur's bloodline." At the same time, Catherine took off Caesar's coat. "How?" Lancelot was shocked. Catherine sneered. "Now you know why we want to take the holy seal from you, right?" At this time, Caesar directly stretched out his hand and pressed on Lancelot's abdomen. "The power of Lancelot du Lake is temporarily mine." The pain when the holy seal began to peel off was 10 times more intense than when the imprint bug took effect. The pain finally broke her nerves and defeated her endurance. The fear of the holy seal being taken away finally made her let out a shrill cry. For a whole half an hour, this kind of scream continued in the stone room. When the holy seal representing the power of Lancelot du Lake appeared on the back of Caesar's hand, Lancelot was almost in a state of collapse. Her body was naturally hanging down, and because of the pain, saliva began to flow from her lips. Caesar looked at the hand with the holy seal and then gently clenched his fist. A gray light instantly enveloped his whole body. The dark gray armor vaguely emitted a dark purple glimmer. When the indestructible lake light also appeared in Caesar's hand at the same time, Lancelot finally lost consciousness and fainted. Ignoring Lancelot's situation at this time, Catherine looked at Caesar with concern and asked eagerly, "How is it?" The third stage of unification is still a bit difficult, but it's almost enough. Caesar dispersed the holy armor on his body and put on his coat again. He glanced at the unconscious Lancelot and said indifferently, "Send her back to Her Majesty, and also send some food." "You are still too kind." Catherine shook her head. Fog City, Night Mechanism. Sir Puskyn's Manor. On the lawn of the manor. The strong wind bent the grass, and the sound of the spirals spinning was very loud. A helicopter was slowly descending at this time. At the same time, in the sky, there were several other helicopters that were planning to descend. An old man, supported by two attendants, slowly walked over from the helicopter. At this time, Knight Gareth, who had been waiting here for a long time, quickly came forward and greeted this old man. This old man was the person in charge of the Birmingham night mechanism. At the same time, there was a bearded man behind the old man. Gareth also greeted, "Tristan, I haven't seen you for a few months, your beard is still so beautiful." "Don't give me that." The bearded man glared at Tristan, who was also one of the 12 knights. In his hand, he was carrying a black box. The box was even connected to Tristan's wrist with handcuff. Looking at the box, Gareth slightly narrowed his eyes. Key. He then looked at the other helicopters that were preparing to descend. The people in charge of the other night mechanisms were sitting on them. At the same time, they were also responsible for transporting the other keys. Only by gathering the keys of the various night mechanisms could the secret room where the Holy Grail was placed be opened. Genius remembered this site's address in 1 second. Mobile version of reading website. Chapter 1296. At 8 in the evening, the first car quickly drove into the suburbs. In a large field of farmland, the bulletproof car stopped in front of a hill. The flat ground suddenly began to rise, revealing a huge steel plate covered with mud and grass. The steel plate was slanted, and this became a special entrance. The bulletproof car drove in. Not far ahead, there was a stone mountain. After entering the ground, there were lights and a straight asphalt road. After walking for about 200 meters, there was a huge gate. When the gate opened, what could be seen was a huge dock built into the mountain. There was only one 30-meter-long small plane here. It looked like a fighter jet. The whole dock seemed to be dedicated to this special fighter jet. More than 10 maintenance workers wearing gray uniforms and hats were working on this huge fighter jet. The bulletproof car finally stopped at an entrance on the side. The Prime Minister hurriedly got out of the car, and someone came to greet him. Mr. Prime Minister just nodded, and then his face slightly darkened, and he quickly walked into the entrance. The person who came to greet him was wearing a star military uniform. In terms of military rank, he was obviously not low. "Are you ready?" The Prime Minister's footsteps became faster and faster. The officer next to him quickly followed and said quickly, "After receiving your call 30 minutes ago, we started preparing. But we are still in the adjustment stage. It is estimated that we will need another hour to reach the best value." "1 hour is too long, try to shorten it." The Prime Minister frowned. "The people who kidnapped the Queen this time are non-human creatures. Those old guys from the night mechanism actually watched the Queen be kidnapped and taken away. That old bastard Hopkins even told me that he didn't estimate it. These guys are still unreliable, we can only rely on ourselves." While speaking, He and the officer had already taken the elevator and finally arrived at a control room. From here, they could see everything in the dock. All the people in the control room stood up at the same time and saluted the Prime Minister. "Let's get to work." The Prime Minister waved his hand, then took off his coat and pinched up his sleeves. At the same time, he took the earphones from the staff. "Set the screen to the adjustment room. Let me see the status of these warriors." "Yes." On the console of the front screen, a woman wearing a military uniform quickly typed. Soon, a set of images appeared on the screen. The scene of the so-called adjustment room. There were a total of 20 machines that looked like huge game cabins and CT scanning machines. They were neatly placed in a huge and empty room. On each of these machines, there were people wearing tight-fitting combat suits. Some were men, some were women. They were all very young, around the age of 20. How beautiful! The Prime Minister looked at everything on the screen. This is our own strength. It's time to show this strength in front of those arrogant knights. Mr. Prime Minister, even if the soldiers in the army are adjusted, we still don't know where the Queen is hiding? Although he had great confidence in everything in this base, this officer had to consider some inhuman factors at this time. "Don't worry, I can find the Queen's location," Mr. Prime Minister said confidently. "All right, as long as this crisis is resolved, then in the future, the matters of the inhuman domain will no longer be exclusive to the night mechanism. Ancient glory? This group of stubborn old fogies who have been controlling us, it's time to consider retirement." As he spoke, the Prime Minister took out a black box about the size of a cigarette box. He looked at the officer and said, "Use this to track the source of the signal. It can help us lock onto the correct location." "This is..." The officer was slightly startled, as if he thought of something. Could it be that the Prime Minister had been secretly tracking the Queen's movements, and installed a tracker on her? "It's not her." The Prime Minister waved his hand. "Don't think too much, do as I say. I don't care if it's the end of the world or the myth of tomorrow. Before tomorrow's sunrise, I want this group of thugs to never see the dawn again." The officer stood at attention and saluted. Very good, good boy. Look at your hair, this Queen must have taken good care of you." In the room, Judas, who had a long beard but a strong physical body, was currently hugging and playing with the small animal that could be described as insignificant to him. This was the Queen's pet. Only Tipu, who was an abandoned disciple of the esoteric pharmacist, was accompanying him. This skinny man with glasses stared gloomily at the small animal that was acting spoiled in Judas's arms, as if it was not a stranger at all. He frowned. "Judas, when did you become so caring?" He just glanced at Tipu and said casually, "I'm actually the same as you." "The same as me?" Tipu was stunned. Judas looked at Tipu, who was sitting in front of the table, and arranging various bottles and jars, as well as various props. "You esoterics need to prepare so many props for a battle. You can't be careless every time, right?" "Yes, this is common sense." Tipu nodded. Judas said calmly, "I'm different. I only use my fists to fight, so it's enough to keep my mind calm. This way I can calm down." "Isn't it because you're essentially a cat-stroking and poop-scooping officer?" Tipu complained. "You should at least take out your gloves and wipe them so that I can feel that you're actually preparing for battle. Why are you so nervous?" Judas shook his head instead. "Although tomorrow is very important, it's not like we haven't experienced life and death before. Is it because of that female esoteric pharmacist in the theater?" There was a reason why Tipu was so angry that he did not hesitate to show up. This was related to his past experience. During the esoteric pharmacist certification exam of the Magician Association, he was framed by his opponent for cheating and even accidentally injured the examiner. In the end, he was stripped of his permanent qualification to become an esoteric pharmacist. In the theater, the female esoteric pharmacist casually said that he did not even want to become an esoteric pharmacist apprentice. This naturally provoked a thorn in Tipu's heart, and he could not endure it. Humph. Tipu frowned slightly. If she dares to show up again, I'll definitely let her try the power of my 10 secret potions. I advise you not to complicate matters. Judas shook his head. From the situation in the theater, that couple should not be interested in our matters. Tipu, the world is very big. Although the leader is very strong, there are definitely people more powerful than him. That invisible barrier, did you see it? Even the leader's full-strength punch couldn't break it, and he injured himself instead. Perhaps he only has the power to defend, but he's only a weakling. Tipu snorted coldly. There are so many defensive items. Doesn't the Magician Association have the Burning 7 Circles, which is known as absolute defense? In addition, I heard that the 13 vampire clans also have secret treasures. They pass on the blood glory, used by the vampire ancestor Cain, which is also known as a divine artifact that cannot be broken by physical attacks. Jodas smiled bitterly. Please, the things you mentioned are either legendary artifacts or priceless treasures. If it's so easy for us to find one, then I should have considered buying a lottery ticket before sunrise. Maybe I could have won the prize. That way, even if I fail tomorrow, I should still be able to enjoy my old age. Useless old thing. Brat. In fact, Tipu was not very old. Although he looked middle-aged, his body had been corroded by a lot of toxins due to long-term contact with secret potions, so he looked much older than normal. In fact, Tipu was only 17 years old this year. He was once known as the most talented genius in the last 100 years in the magician world. Yes, he was only 17 years old this year. Bickering was probably a way to relax. Suddenly, the sound of a harmonica was heard outside the house. Outside, under a tree, Caesar was sitting on the grass, playing the harmonica, and Catherine was leaning on him, looking at the moonlight and the clouds in the night. When Lancelot woke up, her lips were wet. When she woke up, she found herself lying on the ground with a coat under her. It was the one Her Majesty was wearing. At this time, the Queen was using a wet handkerchief to moisten her lips. She even rested on the Queen's lap. Queen, how can I let you? Lancelot struggled to sit up. The Queen pressed her body and blinked. Look, child, you're not even as strong as an old woman. Why are you still trying to be brave? But Lancelot opened her mouth. The Queen smiled and said, When I was young, I participated in the war. Although it was just a support group for women, I still have some experience in taking care of the injured. Although I haven't done it for many years, I'm still a bit rusty. Your right hand seems to be seriously fractured. Was it caused by them? I can only help you fix it. After all, the conditions here are limited. Lancelot struggled to raise her arm. There were 2 pieces of wood wrapped around her arm with cloth. Apparently, the wood was taken from the wooden chair. No. Lancelot shook her head. The fracture of her right hand happened earlier. 1 day ago, her right hand was holding the light of the indestructible lake. It took a direct hit from the legendary most powerful knight, Farlier. Not only did the sword break, but the power of the shock also broke her hand. Thinking of the light of the indestructible lake, she thought of the matter of being deprived of the power of inheritance. Her eyes couldn't help but dim. It seems. The Queen lowered her head and looked at her, whispering, You guys are really working hard in places I can't see. I lost the power of a knight. At this moment the Queen covered her eyes with her palm and said slowly, Right now, the darkness you see is only temporary. When I let go of my palm, the light will appear before your eyes again. But I don't want it to appear immediately. Do you know why? Why? She asked subconsciously. The Queen said, Because the darkness can calm you down. You can't see your weakness. So, you can cry as much as you want. But when the light appears, you need to be ready, child. Lancelot didn't say anything. Merely, the Queen was able to feel the wetness from her palm. At this time, the sound of a musical instrument came from outside the stone room. It was the sound of a harmonica. The Queen recognized it. Her left hand was still covering Lancelot's eyes, but at this time, her right hand was holding something, a black card. This was the card that the Queen gave to her when she met the respected and terrible teacher in the theater. Little Elizabeth, if you encounter something you can't solve, make a wish to this card, and your teacher will appear. But correspondingly, you have to pay something precious. Teacher, the Queen was lost in thought. It was already 8 o'clock in the evening when they came out of another theater. They didn't see the complete Turandot for more than 10 minutes, but the club owner and the maid duo successfully watched the famous Phantom of the Opera. The weather in this month was still very cold in the streets of Fog City. Many passers-by were wrapped in clothes, walking in the wind. Of course, for the club owner and the maid, they didn't feel the cold. It was indeed elegant. Miss Maid's dress today. But didn't it look a bit thin? Master. Suddenly, Miss Maid felt the cold. It was the kind of cold that she personally experienced. She couldn't remember the last time she felt this way when she was weak. The only person in the world who could cause her body to become like this without being aware of anything was probably her master. I suddenly found that the stronger I am, the more interesting things I can't feel. Luochu just smiled, then held Miss Maid's hands, put them to his lips, and blew hot air on them. He gently rubbed them to bring heat. For example, like this. Luochu smiled. Do you think I'm too bad? You can be worse to me. Luochu smiled without saying anything. He took off his coat and put it on Miss Maid. Although it was a bit loose, there were many similar situations on the street. Those lovers who were in love were probably like this. The street was very lively. Miss Maid, wearing her master's coat, leaned on Luochu, holding her handbag, and walked silently with her head down. Then they stopped before the performance of the street artist. It was a street band. The reason why Boss Luo stopped was that he saw a former customer. It's Mr. Ching. Did he come here to study music? Miss Maid looked at him with slight surprise. It was an Oriental young man who was holding a guitar, playing and singing. He was playing and singing in the crowd. Wearing a cap, he played and sang a song called Remember Me. Luochu smiled at this time. He has his own thing. Chapter 1297. The street performance didn't last long. Soon, the crowd dispersed, and it was 9 o'clock in the evening. Ching Yiran began to pack up the tools around him. He was not the only one performing. There were also several new friends he met in the rock bar by chance after coming to Fog City. Thank you so much, Will, for being willing to accompany me. Ching Yiran came to Will, who was packing up the amplifier. You're welcome. Anyway, I have nothing to do at night. Will smiled. Did the police come to you today? Ching Yiran asked casually. Last night, because of Will's call, he called the police, and the police went to the social work center later. After that, he made a recording at the scene and submitted some identity information, and then returned to the dormitory of the music academy. No. Will shook his head, a little puzzled. Those guys didn't come again. It's strange. Later, I called the police and asked. They didn't seem to care about their own affairs, and even had a perfunctory attitude. What about those guys who arrested you? Will still shook his head. They haven't appeared yet. I see. Ching Yiran nodded. You'd better be careful. Where are you going next? Do you want to go to the music bar for a while? Call them? Ching Yiran looked at Will's companion, who was also a member of Will's punk band and his colleague in the social work center. No, I have to go back to the center later. It was a bit messy last night, and some places haven't been cleaned up yet. Then I'll go and help. Ching Yiran smiled. Take it as a thank you for accompanying me tonight? That's great. Ching, can you cook some fried noodles for me while you're at it? I really love your Chinese food. The companion next to him hurriedly shouted happily. Will shook his head helplessly, and then looked at the guitar bag Ching Yiran was carrying. He had been carrying this guitar bag with him all the time, even when he came to the social work center after calling the police last night. Ching Yiran had been carrying a guitar all the time. In fact, Ching Yiran had never taken it out to play. Will was even sometimes curious whether the guitar in the guitar bag was a guitar. In today's street performance, Ching Yiran carried it with him, and at the same time, he carried an extra one for the performance. Will once curiously asked Ching Yiran about the guitar that he never took it out. He just smiled and said that he wasn't ready yet. He didn't have enough weight to pick it up. What was the preparation to pick up a guitar? Of course, Will didn't understand, but without a doubt, he was a person who respected the privacy of others, so he was only curious and didn't ask further. Speaking of which, aren't there a little too many police cars tonight? Ching Yiran watched a police car roar past. In his memory, there were about 3 police cars passing by in the last 15 minutes. Speaking of which, it seems so? Will was stunned. Suddenly, a child walked to Ching Yiran's side and gave him an envelope, saying that someone asked him to deliver it. Ching Yiran was secretly curious. He opened the envelope and saw that it was a card. "You can fly." There was no signature, just a few words of encouragement. The 3 words on the card seemed so monotonous. He couldn't help but be startled. "What's wrong, Chung?" Will asked curiously. "Who sent it to you?" Ching Yiran let Will take a look, then shook his head and said, "Probably a good person who encourages others." Denial, slander, cursing, there were all kinds of things. There were very few people who were willing to encourage a stranger. Receiving a card of encouragement from a stranger made Ching Yiran happier than when he attracted a lot of people during the performance. Even, under Will's curious gaze, Ching Yiran opened the zipper of the guitar bag that he never took out in front of him for the first time and put in the card of encouragement. They talked and laughed and soon came to the door of the social work center. Here, Will saw a guy who surprised him. He was wearing a black jacket and was leaning against the motorcycle, looking around. "Mr. Klein?" Will was very curious as to why this motorcycle rider would visit, and from the looks of it, he seemed to have been waiting for quite some time. The person waiting outside the social work center was indeed Knight Klein, who was ordered to rest in the night organization. "I happen to be free today. I thought of the child yesterday and was a little worried, so I wanted to come and see." Klein quickly explained his reason. That was the truth. Because of his superior, Mr. Gareth's order, Klein was unable to participate in any action of the night organization. But he was a person who couldn't stay idle. He couldn't just put on a red and blue mesh tights and transform into a superhero in a movie to fight crime. As a knight, he had always disdained to deceive others. "I'm afraid you'll be disappointed." Will couldn't help but sigh. What happened? Klein frowned. His intuition told him that something had happened. Actually, a pair of siblings? And wearing a black windbreaker. After listening to Will's description, Klein seemed to have thought of something subconsciously, but he didn't confirm it. "Will, can you tell me in detail the specific characteristics of those guys? How should I say, it feels like a gang, but it doesn't really look like one. Because I remember they said that after the matter was done, they wouldn't appear in front of me again. I also feel strange." Will even said that the attitude of the police was perfunctory. This made Klein even more convinced that Will might have met a member of the night organization last night. But why did they want to catch a child? Siblings, could it be one of the orcs who went missing at the dock yesterday? Klein couldn't help but feel annoyed when he thought that he might have missed an orc who went missing in the incident. Sure enough, he was still too young. "Hey, you guys, stop chatting," Will's colleague suddenly asked. "Will, besides us, who else is going to be on duty tonight? Why is the light inside on?" In fact, it was only one of the rooms in the center that was lit up. Just as everyone subconsciously looked at it, the door of the room suddenly closed. Vaguely, they seemed to see a figure hurriedly flashing by. Could it be the people who caused the destruction last night? Ching Yiran said subconsciously. "This." Will opened his mouth. "I'll go take a look." Surprisingly, Klein said quickly, and without waiting for anyone's reaction, he directly jumped up the wall next to the door. Yes, he jumped up. It was similar to the climbing of parkour, but it was obviously more relaxed. Cool. His colleague was amazed. Will could only hurriedly open the door. This motorcycle rider, is there something wrong with his brain? In the dark corridor, Klein tried his best to soften his footsteps, and at the same time, he tried his best to listen to all the sounds. He really did feel that someone was hiding here. Come out, I already know where you are, there is no need to hide. He tried to make a sound to make the other party nervous. However, Klein didn't notice that there was a pair of amber eyes looking at him from the beam of the dark corridor. Suddenly, the owner of the amber-colored eyes pounced on the young knight from behind. Klein felt the approaching danger, and at the critical moment, he turned around and crossed his hands in front of his body. He only felt a huge force hit him, and he had no choice but to quickly retreat. In the corridor, he only saw a blurry black shadow, which was constantly jumping. Klein was secretly shocked. This time he really met an inhuman. His arm bones were faintly aching. He was injured by the group of demons yesterday and hadn't recovered yet. But at this time, he didn't have time to report to the night mechanism and ask for backup. He could only face the danger head-on. Klein quickly adjusted his breathing and concentrated on observing the movements of the agile black shadow. But at this time, a bang sounded. The corridor was instantly lit up as if it was daytime. The first thing Klein saw was a girl, who was currently raising her arm high, but the moment the light was turned on, the girl's arm suddenly stopped. What are you doing? When the light was turned on, the girl stopped her attack, and Will's puzzled voice was heard. The next moment, the girl quickly retreated all the way to Will's front. Klein was about to shout for her to be careful, but he was stunned by the girl's next move. He saw that the girl didn't want to attack Will. Instead, she stood in front of Will and looked at him with a fierce and vigilant expression. Rather than saying that she wanted to hurt Will, it was more accurate to say that she wanted to protect him. Who can tell me what is going on? Ching Yiran was the last to arrive with a confused face. She looked at the scene in front of her, and then she also looked at the girl who was posing. When she was about to say something, she saw a swinging tail behind the girl. Things, this tail is real? Mr. Chen, what are you doing? In the corridor. To be exact, in the corridor outside the presidential suite of the Song Dynasty Hotel in Fog City, Peter Chan, who was in charge of receiving him this time, was sneakily sticking his ear to the door, as if he was eavesdropping. Don't be noisy, I'm listening. I'm listening. Peter Chan suddenly closed his mouth, because he recognized the voice that asked him the question. Master Chiu. Good evening. The moonlight tonight is so beautiful, ah ha 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 ha. The moonlight tonight is indeed very beautiful. Luoqiu nodded and casually looked out of the window. Then, Mr. Chen, what did you hear? This. Peter Chan quickly said, listen to the movement of the rats. Master Chiu, you don't know, today is our hotel's anti-rat day. You don't know, these rats are very smart, I don't know what they eat to grow up. I see. Luoqiu smiled and nodded. Do you want to go in? No, I'll just listen. Yes, I've listened. Master Chiu, don't worry, there is absolutely no problem with your room. It's very hygienic and safe. At the same time, Peter Chan didn't hurry to move aside and made a gesture of inviting him in warmly. However, he was quite confused. He didn't see Master Chiu go out all day, so why did he suddenly come back from outside? And his female companion also came back, and it seemed like she just came back from shopping. But in the afternoon, didn't the cleaner say that she saw the two of them sunbathing on the balcony of the suite? Thank you. Luoqiu smiled and nodded. He directly swiped the door card and walked into the room with Miss Maid. If you have any orders, just let me know. Master Chiu. I'm here 24 hours a day. Thank you. But I think, Mr. Chen, it's better for you to rest. No trouble, no trouble. Peter Chan hurriedly smiled apologetically. But in his mind, he was thinking about what happened when he reported the information to Miss Ng last night. Last night, what? A sexy women's sailor suit in a smaller size? Did he really want this? Song Ying, who was applying a facial mask, suddenly opened her mouth and the mask fell off. She muttered in disbelief. I didn't know. That woman looks so dignified, but she actually knows how to seduce men, tut. Miss Ing? Miss Ing? What are you talking about? Oh, no. You did well, Chen. Peter Chan, right? Well, you did very well, keep up the good work. Ing put on a new mask, and then said casually, I want to know what they said, what they ate, what they did, and how long they did it, the more detailed the better, okay? Okay. How long did they do it? Just do it, don't talk so much nonsense. Yes. The door of the room closed slowly, and Peter Chan's thoughts were pulled back from the video call last night. Then, he happily approached the door and put his ear to it. Unexpectedly, the door suddenly opened. Peter Chan felt his ear was burned by something fiercely, and he immediately screamed like a pig being slaughtered. Miss Maid was standing outside the door, holding a kettle used to boil water. She then covered her mouth in surprise. Mr. Chen, why are you still here? Did I hurt you? The water is cold, I was going to throw it away. It hurts. It doesn't hurt, it's okay, ha, it's okay. Peter Chan forced himself to smile. But in his heart, he was crazily complaining. This is the hotel's presidential suite, miss. Are you kidding me by coming out to pour water? And the water is boiling, how can you say it's cold? Genius remembered this address in 1 second. Mobile version of reading website. Chapter 1298. Retorting back was impossible. Chen Bide quickly left with his tail between his legs. He had no choice but to leave. His ears really hurt from the scalding, and he urgently needed something like a burn ointment. When Miss Maid returned to the room, Boss Luo was opening the light screen he used to observe the food. Several different light screens were arranged in an arc in front of him. Facts are really wonderful. Luoqiu suddenly sighed. Yu Yi glanced at the images on these light screens, knowing that her master was talking about what happened in the social work center. These two little guys probably don't want to bother you anymore. Miss Maid smiled. After all, for them, their master is still too mysterious, and they will be afraid and worried. Well, who is this? Hearing Miss Maid's slightly puzzled voice, Luoqiu glanced at the leftmost light screen, which was the scene of a helicopter. You know him? Luoqiu asked curiously. I just expanded according to the relevant concept. Who is this? Mordred, Yu Yi thought and said, one of the 12 Knights of the Night Mechanism, and also one of the survivors of the war 100 years ago. In the early days after the war, he was crowned as a hero. Basically, his name was praised in the non-human world of Euroland, and he was called the most powerful knight in history. His strength even surpassed the first Mordred. You fought with him? Luoqiu looked up and asked curiously. Miss Maid shook her head, no. At that time, the former owner created a place with the concept of a castle as the base camp of the Black Soul envoys. The war happened in this castle, and the previous owner was in the hidden layer of the castle. It's a pity that in the end, they didn't manage to break into the hidden layer. Instead, they slaughtered a batch of inferior Black Soul envoys that the previous owner temporarily transformed. Then why did they think they had one? Luoqiu was more curious. Miss Maid smiled and said, because before the hidden floor, the last gatekeeper is number 31 and Kintaro. At that time, more than half of the subjugation crusade troops were killed before they managed to send number 31 back to the Ark of the Covenant. Although they suffered some injuries, they still had a good time. However, the overall combat strength of the subjugation crusade had been reduced to less than 20%. The previous shop owner saw that there was no point in doing so, so he ordered Kintaro to retreat. After that, the punitive forces destroyed the castle. After looting some things, they declared victory. Well, it seemed that the previous generation's bad taste was even worse than his. Spoils? They are just some useless trinkets that were cleared out from the storehouse to make space. Of course, in order to make the effect more realistic, the previous generation also put in a few valuable items. It seemed that the last few treasures had been divided among the leading forces of the punitive expedition. Therefore, there's actually no loss. Master, please rest assured. Luochu changed the topic without changing his expression. What about Knight Mordred? Miss Maid looked at the helicopter flying in the night sky on the light screen again. She recalled and said, probably past the passing line of a transcendent. At that time, he could have fought with Kintaro for a few rounds. Right, I remember, his real name is Farrell. Strictly speaking, he has no talent but is very hard-working. Well, what happened later? Why was he locked in the castle? It was still the light screen at the edge, but the time on the light screen had begun to rewind. Everything began to rewind. Finally, it went back to one night before, the moment when Farrell broke through the door with the soul witch in front of the castle on the island. Because 3 years after the war, Farrell suddenly slaughtered more than half of the members of the Knight organization, including 2 of the 12 knights who were heavily injured and had no choice but to retire. Just like that, he went from being a hero praised by many to being the most vicious and evil knight in history. In fact, after the war, Farrell's power had further improved. He probably left the initial stage of transcendent. In this way, Miss Maid felt that her master might have no idea, so she directly took out a unit of measurement. If external factors are not considered, Farrell 3 years after the war should be able to fight with the heroic spirit summoned by Miss Lucifer. Excluding humans with special bloodlines, this Knight Farrell is probably the only one among the ordinary people who can be compared with the fire cloud evil god of Hua Nation. Why did he slaughter his companions? Miss Maid said, how should I say post-war PTSD, if described by modern science, is probably the most appropriate. He didn't feel that the war had been won. Instead, he felt that he had lost the war. He even suspected that all his companions had been corrupted by the Black Soul Envoys. His companions had even become the Black Soul Envoys. The victory was fabricated. Of course, he was right about this. However, the people around him thought that Farrell was delusional and thought that he was sick. Later, Farrell's illness worsened, which led to the slaughter in one night. When dawn came, he had a brief moment of clarity. After realizing what he had done, he voluntarily put himself in prison to atone for his crimes. He should have been sentenced to death, but later, people used his achievements in the war to offset his crimes. In the end, he was sentenced to about 800 years of imprisonment. In fact, the Knight organization was reluctant to give up on Farrell because they believed that time would be the best medicine to heal wounds. A long period of imprisonment might allow Farrell to recover. They needed a powerful force like Farrell to subvert common sense. I'm suddenly very interested in meeting him. Luochu smiled slightly. I wonder what kind of person he is. Oh, by the way, can you compile a list of the survivors of the war 100 years ago for me? Since they have extraordinary power, they should be able to survive, right? Yes, there are still some. Miss Maid nodded. I'll sort it out after Master takes a rest. Miss Maid, who was still an alchemy puppet, naturally didn't need to sleep. Luochu waved his hand and temporarily turned off the information light screen on the far left. His eyes swept to the one in the middle. Social Work Center. Yes, it's me, Klein. Sorry to trouble you, Mr. Nick, to send the things to this address. No need, I think I can handle it. After that, Knight Klein put away the phone and looked at the scene in front of him in distress. Among them, Will, his 2 colleagues, and Ching Yiran were standing together. On the other side, there was Miss Orc who attacked him and her brother. At this time, Miss Orc was constantly receiving frightened and curious looks from several people in the social work center. In fact, she had long been used to such looks, so she was quite calm at this time. However, Olga was a little nervous at this time, and he looked at Will from time to time. This was an activity room in the social work center. At this time, it was abnormally quiet. Klein knew that he needed to break this silence first, so after 2 coughs, he slowly looked at Will and said, "I know, some things are difficult to explain. But please believe me, I am not a bad person, and I, and people like me, exist because of these things. Do you understand what I am saying?" "I know. Like the Avengers, right?" At this time, Will's companion said "cool" twice and then looked at Miss Ork with shining eyes. "It's really Miss Ork, not a cosplayer, but a real person. Oh, God, can I take a picture? Can I touch your tail?" Miss Ork was baring her teeth. "Don't be so rude." Will could only pull his companion, and then began to explain to Miss Ork using both his hands and mouth. In the end, he gave up on using body language, took out his phone, and began to use the translation software. "Should I say that I'm insensitive, or that I have a strong ability to accept?" Klein smiled bitterly in his heart. In the past, he had heard many seniors who had become official knights and could go out on missions alone mentioned that occasionally he would meet ordinary people who not only did not have any resistance to non-humans, but even excitedly asked about it. This time, he met one. The young knight was still thinking hard about how to deal with this matter. Fortunately, because of the sudden appearance of Will and the others, there was no real fight between him and Miss Ork in the end. After that, he explained his origins. Thus, under the doubtful attitude of the Beast Woman, the scene of everyone being in the same activity room happened. In fact, the main reason was that Olga whispered in her ear some of the things that happened yesterday, saying that this Klein should be a good person. At this moment, unlike them. Although Ching Yiran was also surprised by the existence of orcs, after the surprise, he did not panic too much. He was still carrying a guitar that could not be explained by common sense. But he only stood silently at the side, not intending to attract the attention of others. Miss Ork suddenly stood up and faced Klein. At the same time, she whispered something into the phone that Boss Luo gave her. Not long after, the mechanical female voice of the translator sounded. "Can I really believe you?" Klein could only use the same method to communicate with the other party. "Miss, please believe me. I really mean no harm. In fact, yesterday, my companion rescued a group of orcs who were kidnapped by orc traffickers at the pier. But in the chaos, a few orcs got lost. I believe that you should be one of them. Now, I am asking my companion to bring one of the orcs. I think, when he arrives, everything I said can be proven." Miss Ork suddenly nodded and said a few more words into the phone. "Okay, I'll believe you for now." Klein was a little gratified and quickly said, "Thank you for trusting me. Also, can I ask why you trust me? Are you moved by my sincerity?" Knights must be sincere. This was the valuable experience that Mr. Gareth taught them. "I can hear people's heartbeats," Miss Ork said indifferently. "People who lie will have slight changes in their heartbeats. I can hear it." "That's it?" Klein was disappointed for a while. "So it was not my sincere gaze? Sure enough, my practice is still not enough?" This time, there was no translation. Miss Ork just nodded. Klein showed an awkward smile, and then came in front of Will and the others. "Mr. Will, I'm sorry for scaring you tonight. If possible, please accept my apology." Will and the others looked at each other. How could they say it? In general, this guy on the motorcycle was quite old-fashioned. No, it's nothing." Will shook his head. "Actually, I think that if those guys last night were like you, there wouldn't be so many things after that. I'm really sorry." Looking at the motorcycle rider bowing 90 degrees to apologize, Will and the others couldn't hold it anymore. Will could only wave his hand and say, "Oh right. How about we get something to eat? I think everyone should be hungry, right?" With that, Will quickly winked at his companions and Ching Yiran, meaning to let them leave now. Obviously, Will didn't really want to prepare food. He intended to use this excuse to let them leave first. "Yes, I'm hungry too. Let's go and get something to eat. Let's go, Ching, come and help." His companions were about to open the door. Unfortunately, Clay stood in front of the door and said apologetically, "I'm sorry, everyone. For the time being, I can't let you out of my sight. According to the rules of the Night Organization, any ordinary person involved in inhuman matters must be under our surveillance. Of course, we won't invade your private property and safety. So, please cooperate with me." Fight. They couldn't win, so they had to come back embarrassedly. After that, the activity room became quiet all of a sudden. Chingiran suddenly walked to Will's side and asked in a low voice, "Will, this child, is he the talented child you told me about last night?" Will nodded. This might be a topic that could ease the atmosphere. "Yes, you must be amazed. This child is really a genius." Suddenly, Oga left his sister's side. Under the surprised gaze of Miss Beastman, he walked to Will's side and gently pulled up the corner of his shirt. Will looked at him with a face full of surprise. Oga seemed to be saying something. Seeing Will's puzzled gaze, he finally took out his harmonica and played a song quickly. "You want to finish learning the song from last night?" Will seemed to understand. Oga seemed to understand too, so he nodded lightly. His face was slightly red, bashful and shy, but his eyes were full of anticipation. Will swallowed his saliva, at the same time telling himself loudly in his heart that this was a boy. 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 Baidu search 81 Chinese website. No advertising message. Chapter 1299. Fog City, outside the city, in Sir Puskins Manor. Inside the Night Organization, in front of a huge round table, people were sitting around it. They were all the people in charge of the Night Organization. At this moment, in front of them, there was a similar box. This place was heavily guarded, because, outside the round table conference room, except for Lancelot who had been kidnapped, all the current 12 round tables were guarding here. In addition, there were nearly 30 Grand Knights and hundreds of Elite Knights. "Let's begin," Sir Puskins said softly, and first opened the box in front of him. He took out a green gem the size of a pebble. At the same time, the people in charge of the Night Organization also took out the same thing from the box in front of them almost at the same time. After that, Sir Puskins unscrewed the carving on his cane, and then inserted it into a small indentation on the table in front of him, and turned it. The sound of gears turning was heard, and the floor in the center of the round table opened at this moment. A king's statue holding a sword slowly rose from the floor. The stone sword held by the statue had circular indentations on the blade, which corresponded to the gem held by each person in charge. When the gems seemed to be attracted by something, they automatically flew out from their hands and inserted themselves into the indentations of the stone sword. Everyone held their breath and carefully watched this scene. Although I have always known of its existence, I have never really seen it since I took over. I didn't expect that I would be able to see it in my lifetime. The one who spoke was an old man who was much older than Sir Puskins. His eyes were blurred, and he didn't blink, staring at every change on the statue. Crack! Suddenly, a light sound startled everyone. They saw that the king's statue, starting from the head, had split open and scattered in all directions. Like the blooming of flower petals, what was revealed in the end was a small stone. And in the middle of that stone was a simple stone cup. This is the legendary Holy Grail? The crowd, who had never thought that the Holy Grail would look like this, suddenly felt an indescribable sense of disappointment. Perhaps in their imagination, the Holy Grail should be more precious. Perhaps it didn't need to be too gorgeous. At the very least, it should make people feel that it was extraordinary at first glance. However, this silence only lasted for a few seconds. After a few seconds, the Holy Grail on the stone platform suddenly trembled. A large number of cracks even appeared on its body. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. After an intense tremor, it completely shattered. A dazzling golden light filled every corner of the room in an instant, causing them to be unable to open their eyes. After their vision had adjusted, they once again looked at the Holy Grail in bewilderment. After that, they could no longer conceal the excitement in their hearts. The Holy Grail in front of them was the real deal. It was as if there was boundless magic. Even if one looked at it, their souls seemed to be drawn. Before their eyes, they could not help but see the scene of the kingdom of heaven. Peace, happiness, contentment. The feeling of happiness that a human should bring filled their hearts in an instant. A strange yet infatuated smile of contentment involuntarily surfaced on their faces. Cluck, cluck. A knocking sound suddenly rang out at this time. This time, everyone suddenly quivered and woke up one after another. They saw that this was the sound of Sir Hopkins knocking on the table with his cane. "Everyone, please keep quiet," Sir Hopkins slowly said, as if he didn't see the crowd's loss of composure. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. The grape cup of the Last Supper, legend has it that it even once contained the blood of the Holy Son. A magical cup that can fulfill any wish. The old man muttered to himself, "Everyone, this isn't the Holy Grail in the Bible, but something created by that sinful place 100 years ago. It only has the name of Holy Grail, but it's definitely not a holy object." An old woman frowned at this time. "It's written very clearly in the literature that a sacrifice is required to activate it." Speaking of the sacrifice, the willpower of the other person in charge of the night mechanism weakened a little. At this time, the person who was still infatuated with the cup on the stone platform seemed to have woken up from a dream, and cold sweat broke out all over his body. "So, Hopkins, the Holy Grail has been taken out. What are you going to do with the most important part, the sacrifice?" Facing everyone's gazes, Sir Hopkins took a deep breath and slowly said, "It needs to devour souls to activate. Of course, it's impossible to devour the souls of living people, so this time I'm going to use something else. In fact, it's best to use prisoners on death row as sacrifices, but unfortunately, the death penalty has been abolished now." Someone suggested, "Maybe we can try to use those super criminals. Anyway, our relationship with the Magician Association is a little stiff now, so we don't need to hand over those wanted criminals to them." Sir Hopkins shook his head. "After those criminals were captured, the Magician Association has been simultaneously notified. If we don't take them out now, it'll arouse their suspicion. Even if it's because of the country, we were once allies 100 years ago, so there's no need to really make our relationship cold." "Then what are you going to do? What other good sacrifices do you have? Are you going to use the heroic souls of the Heroic Soul Palace?" Sir Hopkins waved his hand and calmed everyone down. "Maybe it's fate. Just before the crisis of the myth of Doomsday was launched, the night mechanism of the Fog City just happened to destroy a criminal group of orcs smuggling. Currently, this group of orcs is here." "Orcs? Orcs?" someone muttered. "Since they were captured and sold as orc slaves, I think those slave traders wouldn't dare to capture a few fierce orcs protecting their clansmen. It's also possible. Someone was tempted. Then that's it. I won't see them." This person was even more direct. "All right, Hopkins, even if you've chosen the sacrificial offering, you can't do it openly." The old man muttered, "Especially not in front of the 12 knights. This will shake their knightly belief." "Don't worry, I've already taken care of it." Sir Hopkins was expressionless, but he knocked on the table with his cane again. At this moment, the wall on one side of the round table conference room slowly moved aside, and a knight with a cold face and body stained with blood slowly walked in with a long sword dripping with blood in his hand. The strong smell of blood instantly made everyone frown, and the moment they looked at the knight with cold eyes, they couldn't help but feel a chill. "This is Grand Knight Simpton," Sir Hopkins said calmly. "I've already asked him to take care of it in advance. He's holding the magic sword Hegni in his hand. The souls of those orcs have already been stored in this magic sword." "Simpton? Is that him? That kid?" The people in charge all started to re-evaluate this man with a gloomy face, and some information about Simpton began to appear in their minds. Many years ago there was a rioting orc. The ferocity of this orc gave the Knight Organization, and even the entire Magician Association, a headache. In the end, this orc was captured and killed. However, when the troops at that time found the base of this orc, they also saved many innocent humans. Most of them were women. What shocked the troops at that time was that these women were all raped by this orc and gave birth to children. These children were all used for all kinds of experiments. Even after they were saved, these children were basically broken. It seemed like there was only one conscious child left. Later on, this child was raised by the Knight Organization and eventually became a Grand Knight. Grand Knight Simpson slightly lowered his head, as if he didn't see the gazes of those people in charge. Hopkins also ignored those gazes and slowly said, "Okay, Grand Knight Simpson, I'll give you the glory of activating the Holy Grail. Are you ready?" "Yes, my lord." Grand Knight Simpson raised his sword and saluted. Then, he slowly walked to the table where the Holy Grail was placed. He placed the tip of his demon's sword on top of the Holy Grail. Blood began to pour out of the blade and drip into the Holy Grail. The power of the Holy Grail will increase according to the number of sacrifices. Sir Hopkins said with a serious expression, "There are 43 orc souls here. It's impossible for the Holy Grail to directly solve this crisis." "What do you plan to do, Hopkins?" "The root of this chaos is the Doomsday Myth organization." Hopkins said directly, "We need all the information about this organization, including the name list of their members and their location. Only by eliminating them from the root can we prevent something like this from happening in the future." Drops of blood dripped down from the demon's sword. When the cup was almost half full, the Holy Grail once again emitted a bright light. At the same time, an ancient parchment scroll slowly appeared in front of Sir Hopkins. "Paid to the madam, $5 million. Of course, a prompt like this wouldn't appear. What appeared was just a prompt in a format similar to this. The general content was, "You have received a sum of normal souls. Quantity, 43. In Boss Luo's mind, he once again heard the lowly voice of the altar that he imagined. "Why do I suddenly feel like I found $100 in the pocket of someone's clothes that I haven't worn in a long time, Master?" Miss Maid didn't understand why her master suddenly said this. She slightly tilted her head and her hair fell down. "Don't move. This position is not bad." Boss Luo, who had written a maxim for himself, decided to do a lot of things. At the same time, he didn't want to be trapped in endless transactions. Therefore, he restrained himself from the time-wasting activity of observation all the time. Inside the room, Miss Maid and her master were starting an activity called photography. After all, it was a long night. Without a mobile phone or a clock, in the dark stone room, the only thing that could judge the time was probably the human body's perception. The Queen felt a little tired. It should be past her usual sleeping time. Lancelot didn't lie down. When the Queen's palm was released from her eyes, she had recovered a little. She used the fastest time to eat the food sent by Caesar to replenish her strength. She seemed to be a different person, but she seemed to be the same as before. The Queen smiled and looked at Lancelot's actions at this time. "Is this useful?" the Queen couldn't help but ask curiously. Lancelot was holding the shackles on her hands and began to grind on the floor of the stone room. A lot of stone powder had been ground out. Lancelot said seriously, "This kind of shackles was developed by the Magicians Association. It is specially used to imprison extraordinary power. It is made of a special alchemy mineral called Hamu stone. But it has basically been eliminated now. In fact, there are still many of these tools left in the Knight's mechanism. Although it is very convenient to imprison extraordinary power, it is not strong. There was once a prisoner who broke the chain in this way." "I see." The Queen nodded with relief. "In your opinion, how long will it take to break it?" Lancelot shook her head. "It's hard to say. At that time, the prisoner seemed to have spent more than half a month to break it. However, it's better to have a way than not. We can't keep waiting for rescue. Your Majesty, can you please pay attention to the outside? If someone is coming in, I want to stop this. All right, child, I'll help you keep an eye on it. Trust me, I can do it. The Queen was still smiling happily. However, more than half a month. The Queen couldn't help but smile bitterly in her heart. She didn't tell Lancelot that Caesar would execute her before sunrise. The Queen didn't intend to deny Lancelot's efforts at this time. Instead, she slowly walked to the door and pretended to listen carefully to the sound outside. It seems that someone is really coming. The Queen quickly turned around at this time. Lancelot quickly lay on the ground, covering the stone powder that was ground out. At the same time, she retracted the chain and turned her body sideways. When the door opened, the Queen took a few steps back and blocked in front of Lancelot. What are you doing? The people who came in were Judas and Catherine. Catherine looked at the Queen suspiciously at this time. Her Majesty was neither salty nor indifferent at this time, with the anger and sarcasm of an imprisoned person. Ladies and gentlemen, don't you know that this kind of cold place can easily make me sick? If I don't stand up and move around, it is very likely that I will be cold. I ask you to give me a better treatment. Judas frowned. Obviously, he hated this so-called aristocratic behavior. Then I hope you have enough exercise. Otherwise, it will be colder when it is late at night. You rude people! Her Majesty immediately scolded angrily. Catherine just sneered, but did not care. Instead, she looked at Lancelot on the ground. This girl, is she still not awake? What did you do to her? Her Majesty continued to scold angrily. Let me see if she is dead or not. Catherine sneered and was about to walk past the Queen. Unexpectedly, Her Majesty frowned at this time and stopped her, continuing to scold angrily. You have already made her like this, do you still want to hurt her? As the Queen of Great Britain, I ask you to stop this rude behavior immediately. Bad old woman. Catherine snorted lightly. Forget it. Judas said indifferently, Caesar just asked us to take a look, there is no need to argue with her. How about this, Your Majesty, if you feel cold, I will send you a blanket later. I also ask for a pot of hot tea, and it is best to bring more fresh milk. I need fresh milk to sleep peacefully. Do you think this is a hotel? Damn old woman. Do you still not know your situation? Women always make things difficult for other women? Judas shook his head, reached out and pulled Catherine out. Well, there is no fresh milk, but I can send you some hot water. If there is nothing else, just stay here. After the door was closed, Her Majesty slowly breathed a sigh of relief. She leaned against the door and listened for a while, then said, Well, they should have gone far. Child, am I right? I can do it well. Only then did Lancelot sit up and gratefully look at Her Majesty the Queen, who stood in front of him. Can you hear anything? Her Majesty suddenly frowned at this time. Lancelot was startled and listened attentively. She seemed to hear some sound coming from outside. The air seemed to be trembling slightly. A huge fighter plane was slowly descending from the night sky at this time. Chapter 1300. Obviously, even the Queen and Lancelot, who were in the stone room, could hear the sound. It was impossible for the members of the myth of Doomsday not to be alerted. What happened? Catherine and Judas were the last to come out. When they arrived, Caesar and Tipu were already standing outside. A huge shadow appeared in the sky. The flickering lights on it finally allowed them to vaguely see its appearance. This is... Judas immediately frowned. At this time, a rapid beast cry was heard. It was the Queen's pet, who was now crying out in fear at the huge monster in the sky. It seems that the other party is not incompetent. Did they find it? Judas could not help but feel a little worried. It was reasonable to say that this place should be shielded from all magic sensing means. They were even confident that they could safely wait for the arrival of the next day's sunrise. But in fact, not to mention the sunrise now, there was still more than an hour to midnight, and it was still within today's time. Leader? Tipu at this time hurriedly looked at Caesar at this time. Caesar said indifferently, "You guys leave with the queen, leave this place to me. Let's meet at the agreed place." But Catherine grabbed Caesar's arm with one hand. He just looked at her with a smile, and took out the harmonica from his chest and handed it to Catherine, and said softly, "Help me keep it safe. As long as it is here, I will definitely come back." Catherine was silent for a while, and finally nodded. She knew very well the meaning of this harmonica to Caesar. This was a relic left by his deceased wife, and she had been taking it with her all the time. She cherished it very much. "If I don't see you before dawn, I'll drop it. You remember this?" Catherine suddenly tiptoed and bit Caesar's shoulder hard, and then rushed into the house without looking back. "You be careful," Judas quickly said. "Leader, we will wait for you." Tipu also hugged Caesar. They all left. Caesar took a deep breath. He looked at the faintly discernible holy seal on the back of his hand, and then looked up at the huge black shadow in the sky. The holy seal is not moving, isn't it a night mechanism, above the night sky, inside the huge fighter jet? A row of more than 20 young men and women wearing tight blue combat suits were sitting in 4 rows. On the screen, the Prime Minister's appearance was reflected in their sight. He encouraged all the young men and women there with a high-spirited tone. "In front of you are the extremely dangerous Inhumans who have destroyed the safety of our country. But I believe that years of hard work and sweat are enough to make you the most elite warriors. Each and every one of you is the culmination of our nation's painstaking efforts. Today, you will become the sword that saves the world. Warriors of the warriors of the warriors, warriors of the Fun Warriors Legion in your stage." They raised their heads and said in unison, "We are the sword of salvation. We are the warriors of the Warriors Legion." As they spoke, their seats began to move. Suddenly, at the same time, strange metal parts began to assemble on their bodies from the back of their chairs. Metal parts like kinetic exoskeleton armor were assembled on their legs, arms, waist, and other places, and finally even their heads. They were wearing a light helmet. All of this was completed in less than 10 seconds. Finally, the deck of their seats opened up. Outside was the night sky outside of the battlefield. They began to slide down from here. One by one, the warriors of the Warriors Legion fell into the sky, and at this time, the armor on their backs suddenly opened up, turning into strange, shell-like thrusters on both sides. They achieved the freedom of individual movement in the sky. At the same time, in the huge control room of the headquarters, the faces of these warriors appeared on the screen at the same time, along with their personal information. Power value, HP value, it's finally starting. The Prime Minister silently looked at the screen, but at this time, he calmed down. In the distance, on a small hill, 2 men wearing jackets, with grass rings on their heads and a huge turf covering their bodies, were observing the night sky with night vision goggles. One of them even had a cigarette in his mouth. Finally, the secret weapon of the British government has appeared. The man with the cigarette in his mouth was slightly excited at this time. He spoke in authentic Hua language. "Leader, we have been lurking for a few years, and finally we have some results." The companion beside him couldn't hide his excitement at this time. "I haven't been back for a few years, and I don't know what the situation in the Bureau is like." "Okay, stop talking nonsense. We must record these things and send them back as soon as possible. This thing seems to be some kind of high-tech product. I believe that Dr. Zhao of the First Research Institute will be so excited that he won't be able to sleep." "Roger." In the courtyard in front of the old monastery, Caesar stood alone with his hands behind his back, looking at the figures slowly descending from the night sky with indifferent eyes. There was only one priest in this monastery, and the priest had even retired and was currently trapped in a room in the monastery. No one would have thought that Her Majesty the Queen of Great Britain would be locked in this inconspicuous monastery on the outskirts of Fog City. The number was 23. Caesar silently counted these guys in strange armor. They were all very young, and they were holding huge guns in their hands. At this time, 2 of them slowly landed on the ground. The shell-shaped armor wings on their backs slowly folded, and at the same time, they pointed the guns in their hands at Caesar, making an aiming gesture, and said in a deep voice, "Don't move." Caesar glanced at them indifferently and stretched out his hand from behind. But at this time, one of the 2 young men on the ground suddenly pulled the trigger of the weapon in his hand. A ray of light flew past Caesar's cheek at the speed of light, and at the same time, a loud noise came from behind Caesar. Caesar looked back and saw that the wall of the monastery had melted, leaving a big hole with a diameter of nearly 1 meter. The edge of the damaged wall was in a state of melting, and the high temperature even seemed to distort the space. "I've already said, don't move." The young man who fired the gun at this time said sternly, "Please put down your weapons and surrender, you have been surrounded." "I said don't move." Caesar looked at these guys and slowly took out a carton of cigarettes from his clothes. Under everyone's gaze, he lit it as if there was no one around, and took a puff. When the smoke came out, he slowly opened his mouth and said, "Although I'm not very clear about your background, it seems like this is your first battle?" His voice not only sounded in the ears of the 23 members of the FU at the same time, but also in the control room of the F headquarters. The Prime Minister, who had been observing, could not help but frown. "If I were you, I wouldn't appear with such great fanfare if your mission is to save people." Caesar said casually, "So, are you trying to show something, and you're in a hurry to show it? Take him down, don't talk nonsense with him. Attack the monastery. Annihilate the enemy." In the sky, the leading young man gave the order in a deep voice. "Sure enough, the goal is not to save the hostages." Caesar shook his head and then stomped his foot. In the next moment, he appeared in front of one of the 2 soldiers on the ground and threw a punch, but the soldier reacted quickly and raised one of his arms. Caesar's fist hit the armor on the soldier's arm, but a small light shield spread out from the armor and blocked Caesar's fist. However, the soldier did not seem to be in a good condition. He took a few steps back and finally stood firm with the extension of the armor on his leg. His reaction is not bad. Caesar looked at this guy with some surprise, and then carefully looked at the armor on these soldiers. In the control room of the F base, the Prime Minister looked at this inhuman criminal with a sneer. He liked to see the shocked faces of these inhuman criminals. In order to deal with the extraordinary speed of these inhumans, each of these special armors called Dragon Cavalry was equipped with more than 5 miniature high-speed video cameras, which could ensure that they could capture 360 degrees of movement without any blind spots from all directions. At the same time, in order to allow the user of the Dragon Cavalry to be able to deal with such terrifying motion capture, each user's body had been modified by a large amount of drugs and various technological means. Not only that, the Dragon Cavalry was also equipped with an auxiliary AI system, which could be used in both ways to deal with any special situation. And these were just the tip of the iceberg of the Dragon Cavalry armor technology. Tremble before the crystallization of mankind. Inhuman. Fire! Accompanied by the shout of the young man who seemed to be the leader of the FE group, more than a dozen red light spots suddenly appeared on Kate's body. He seemed to be unable to react in time. He saw all the soldiers of the F group activate their weapons at the same time, and beam after beam of light crazily fell on Caesar's body. Boom, 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 boom. The courtyard in front of the monastery was filled with smoke and dust. The terrifying destructive power of the weapons was like the bombardment of RPG shells, but at the same time, the high temperature of the weapons was so high that even the soil was melted. After a round of fire that lasted for 20 seconds, the leader of the F group made a gesture to stop the fire. In the thick smoke, they all activated their imaging scans. In the crystal display in front of their eyes, they saw that Caesar's figure was motionless in the thick smoke. His body didn't explode? In the control room, the image of the scan appeared at the same time. At this moment, the Prime Minister looked at the figure that seemed to be moving in the thick smoke. The ground had turned into scorched earth, and amid the potholes, Caesar's figure walked out of the thick smoke step by step. He was like a traveler walking on the land of purgatory. The Baroque-style coat was already broken. Caesar tore it open casually, and the coat was directly broken. Seeing his appearance, the members of the F group raised their weapons and aimed again. 20 scarlet light spots converged on Caesar's body again. This must be a lie. After 20 seconds of fire, they only managed to destroy this guy's coat? I see. At this moment, Caesar patted the ashes on his coat. If it's at this level, most of the Inhumans wouldn't be able to block it. Then, the only fate left would probably be a tragic death. Even I would be at a disadvantage if I were to fight with you guys like this. He shook his head and began to slowly unbutton his shirt. But at this moment, the members of the F group obviously didn't intend to wait. They started to design again. However, Caesar waved his hand to block, or rather, he waved his hand to slap them. His arm seemed to have turned into a phantom, and it seemed to be faster than the speed of light. He actually easily swatted away the beams of light that were shooting at him. At the same time, he didn't stop his action of unbuttoning his shirt with his left hand. Finally, under the horrified gazes of the F group, Caesar blocked this round of fire. The weapons had to enter a short cooldown period, and Caesar finally took off his shirt, revealing a body that was close to the golden ratio but didn't bulge. The shirt hung naturally on his palm, and he gently let go of his hand. Boom! The moment the shirt hit the ground, the entire earth began to tremble. The seemingly light shirt smashed a huge crater into the scorched earth. The cracks on the edges spread all the way to the entire courtyard of the monastery, and the walls fell down with a loud crash. The moment his shirt fell to the ground, Caesar's legs lightly bounced off the ground, and the ground split open once more. Once again, he appeared in front of the FS member who had received his first punch. This time, he once again threw a punch at him. With the high-speed camera and the assistance of artificial intelligence, the F group's member only succeeded in lifting his finger this time. Boom! With this punch, the F group's member didn't fly backward as expected. The armor in front of his Dragon Knight's chest directly shattered. Then, his entire body directly exploded. Blood mist drifted away. On the ground, only some fine fragments and blood clots were left. In the control room of the F group's headquarters, the Prime Minister suddenly stood up. His mouth was wide open, and his jaw seemed to be about to drop. It seemed like his eyes were wide open. The control room was dead silent. Moon Beast King? In the hotel, the psychic witch was chatting with Pharaoh. After leaving the prison, the psychic witch felt that the body of the Knight of Time was very smelly, so she insisted that he take a good shower and found a temporary hotel. After freshening up, Pharaoh's face looked better. Perhaps it was an illusion, but the spirit witch felt that his flesh seemed to have grown a little, and he wasn't as shriveled as when he was in the castle prison. At this moment, Miss Julienne was cutting this knight's messy long hair, and they talked about some ancient knowledge. According to legend, only 1 out of 10 million orcs will be born as the Moon Beast King, and he will have the strongest power. Pharaoh looked at his face that was beginning to dry in the mirror, and he seemed to enjoy this spirit witch cutting his hair. He continued, "Of course, this is just a legend, and I haven't seen it before." Chapter 1301. On the road in the wilderness, a black pickup truck was running crazily. In the back of the pickup truck, Her Majesty was hugging Lancelot and curling up in a corner. As for Jodas, he looked at the two of them expressionlessly. Lancelot had no choice but to maintain his unconscious state. At this time, they could vaguely hear the sound from the monastery. Catherine, who was driving, looked at the dark night sky in the rearview mirror from time to time. She seemed to be a little absent-minded. Tipu in the passenger seat suddenly said, Kitten, do you think the leader will transform this time? Or will he just try to use the power of the 12 holy armors? Catherine frowned and said, It's better not to. Do you think Caesar is made of iron? Tipu didn't speak. He was silent for a long time. After a while, he said quietly, I will become the most powerful secret pharmacist and refine that secret medicine. Little brat. Catherine sneered coldly, but there was some warmth in her eyes. The mist-like blood gradually dispersed and finally drifted to the cheek of one of the members of the Fianna. The cold wetness made him shiver suddenly. Then, the member of the Fianna started to scream crazily for some reason. He seemed to have been provoked by something. While screaming crazily, he even kept activating the various weapons on the dragon knight armor. Not only the big gun in his hand, but the shell-shaped thruster on the back also turned into a weapon at this time. The split mini-missiles shot out from the thrusters and dispersed in the air, directly bombarding Caesar's body. Not only that, he also abruptly pulled out the black gold saber equipped on his thigh and charged forward just like that. In the control room of the Fianna, the profile picture of this member on the screen flashed red at this time. The support staff who was monitoring at this time said in horror, Number 17, the spirit value is abnormal. It has exceeded the alert value by 30%. It is in a dangerous state. How did it go over the warning level? Did you already adjust it? The Prime Minister's hands were on the controls, and his mouth was wide open in shock before he finally let out an angry roar. Maybe it was caused by the death of one of their companions. They trained together and had a deeper relationship, so the officer beside him had to guess and explain. Deep feelings? The Prime Minister was furious. They don't need feelings at all. The moment he turned around and glared at the officer, the alarm sounded again on the control panel in front of him, and the panicked and hurried voices of the support personnel were heard. Plane 5 lost contact. Plane 18 lost contact. Unit 22 was in critical condition. Airplane 7 lost control. Pilot number 10's mental strength has reached critical. Prime Minister. How could this be on the screen, as the Dragon Riders were either destroyed or shot down one after another? The avatars of the members of the Fianna on the other screen quickly dimmed or flashed red. The Prime Minister's entire body was pale and powerless as he sat down in his chair. His arms couldn't help but tremble. At the monastery, Caesar was holding a member of the Fianna and slamming him into the ground. The huge impact even tore the soldier's arm and body apart. Only 7 of the 23 soldiers of the Fianna were left. One of them was even in a state of absent-mindedness. They stood on the ground stupidly, motionless. They had to enter the intelligence system of the Dragon Riders to control them. Can't win, can't win, can't win, can't win. Devil. This is the devil. He suddenly screamed in horror. As soon as he turned around, the shell-shaped wings of the propeller instantly spread out. The eruption of air pushed his body directly into the sky, toward the huge fighter. Caesar took a deep breath and took out the lighter from his trouser pocket. He held it tightly and then used all his strength. Boom! A huge air-piercing sound was heard. The next moment, the engine of the fighter was directly penetrated by the flung lighter, causing an instant explosion. The gigantic fighter lost control and crashed into the Fianna member who was trying to escape in fear. He watched in horror as the fighter jet smashed into his body and crashed into the ground. 7 people. Now there were only 6 left in the team. The fighter jet crashed to the ground, destroying a large part of the land in front of the monastery. The blazing light illuminated the surroundings, and Caesar shifted his gaze to another member of the Fianna under the blazing light. It was a female member. Her body trembled as she stood on the spot. She held the big gun with both hands but couldn't stop the body of the gun from shaking. She couldn't aim at all. The red light spots kept drawing circles on Caesar's body. Moisture began to spread from the combat uniform below her abdomen, accompanied by a faintly discernible heat. Finally, her legs went soft and she directly knelt on the ground. "Don't kill me! Don't kill me! Don't!" Caesar walked to the front of the member expressionlessly. His eyes were indifferent. "We used to beg for mercy like this." He stretched out his palm, clenched his 5 fingers, and waved. If there was no accident, the head and body of this female member of the Fianna would be directly separated in the next moment. He waved his hand. "No!" The remaining member screamed miserably. However, his knife-like arm had already been waved. At this time, a head flew out and fell to the ground, rolling. When this decapitated body fell to the ground, the head also stopped rolling. Its head was stained with dust and plant ash, as if it was a piece of trash. It just opened its eyes that had yet to close, staring blankly at the night sky under the stars. Out of the 6, only 5 were left. "Retreat, retreat! Retreat! Retreat, retreat! You guys stay too." Caesar jumped forward, leaping into the night sky like a cannonball, rushing toward one of the remaining 5 people. Just when this person closed his eyes in despair, a figure blocked in front of him, crossed his arms and blocked Caesar's fist. He opened his eyes subconsciously and saw a guy wearing a yellow armor with a weird clown appearance. It seems that I rushed to the end. This clown in yellow armor, at this time, cracked a creepy smile on his scarlet lips. Caesar's jumping impact was not over yet, and he directly fought with this clown knight in the air. Both of their fists were like bullets, crazily shooting out, only to hear the continuous loud noises. In the end, both of them seemed to be on par with each other and fell to the ground. At the same time, a knight wearing dark blue holy armor appeared in front of the female head. He knelt on the ground on one knee, stretched out his hand over the pair of eyes that were not closed, and whispered, "I'm sorry that I couldn't appear by your side in time. Although we didn't know each other, I hope your soul can rest in peace. I believe that you must have been a beautiful lady when you were alive." He seemed to be praying. Caesar glanced sideways. Then, he raised his head. The sound came from the night sky. He saw a helicopter slowly approaching. Unlike the exaggerated fighter jet, this helicopter was obviously an ordinary one. It was just an ordinary military model. At this time, a few more figures jumped down from the helicopter. There was a big man with a beard, a man wearing a highway police uniform, and even a guy wearing a doctor's gown. They were the 12 Knights of the Round Table who were responsible for guarding the Knight organization in various places. At this time, the man in the highway police uniform, Mr. Geraint, suddenly asked, "Why did the clown and Gareth put on the holy armor so early? Aren't they afraid of wasting their strength?" "Who knows? Maybe it's because they're interested in getting the upper hand?" The young man who looked like a doctor shrugged, then looked at the few remaining members of the Fianna. "Who are these guys? They seem to be here to rescue the Queen? Maybe they are from the government." The bearded man, Tresty, frowned and said, "When did the government make these things? It doesn't look like much." The clown, Dagonite, picked his ears with his fingers at this time, and said to the survivors of the Fianna, "To avoid trouble, you should hide first. Don't worry, we won't do anything to you. Even if we want to do something, it will be our old man who will negotiate with your superiors. Of course, I'm more inclined to let you join in the scuffle because I also want to see what these metal lumps on your bodies can do." They, the survivors of the Fianna, looked at each other at this time. Even so, the signal of their communicators was still good, and they were waiting for instructions from the headquarters. These 5 survivors not only maintained a stable mental state, but they even survived until the end under the terrifying power of Caesar. At the headquarters, although the Prime Minister's face was extremely ugly, he also knew that these unknown survivors were important, so without thinking, he ordered them to wait and see, to temporarily withdraw from the battlefield, and to be prepared to retreat at any time. How did the group of old guys from the Knight mechanism find this position? Could it be? The Prime Minister looked at the personnel in the control room suspiciously. This operation was a top-secret operation authorized by him, so it shouldn't have been leaked. He had to suspect that someone leaked the information to the old guy, Hopkins. Otherwise, this group of Knights of the Round Table, even if they found out something, they couldn't have come so quickly. The Fianna was almost wiped out. The appearance of the night mechanism, and the mocking gaze of Hopkins, who was looking at all of this from behind, made the Prime Minister feel like he had been threatened by some bored thugs a few years ago to broadcast a pig *** in front of the public. Of course, in the end, the thugs were successfully captured. At this time, the survivors of the Fianna listened to the order, slowly landed, and retreated to the edge of the battlefield, silent. Caesar didn't touch these people again, but just looked at Gareth, Clown, and the others. They sent out 5 current members of the Round Table at one time. It seems that the night mechanism really values me. Caesar adjusted his breathing. When facing the Fianna, it was a little easier, because although this group of people had powerful weapons, they were not strong individually. At best, their physical fitness was comparable to that of ordinary orcs, and it was difficult for them to control the power of those weapons. But these knights were different. They were all elites who had been tempered, or else they wouldn't have been able to inherit the powerful power of the Round Table. Just in time, it's not too late. Geraint, who was wearing a highway police uniform, twisted his neck at this time. There's still time for you to finish your warm-up. Although I don't know who you are, looking at the situation here, I think you're not a nobody, right? Oberon, that's what you should call me in your information, Caesar said in a low voice. You're the leader of the myth of Doomsday? Gareth suddenly frowned. Mr. Clown whistled. Oh, you've won the prize, you're lucky. Indeed, I'm lucky. Caesar smiled at this time. It just so happens that my blood has become hot. Like I said, the warm-up is almost done. Several members of the Round Table looked at each other, and the young doctor suddenly said, Who's going to do it? Ganging up is not the spirit of the knight's belief. With that, he took the initiative to take 2 steps back, but his eyes were quietly looking at the monastery behind Caesar. Obviously, compared to dealing with the leader of the myth of Doomsday, he was more interested in finding an opportunity to enter the monastery to find out what was going on. After all, the most important task of the mission was to rescue the hostages. The shadow slowly stretched behind him, and then separated, turning into a vague shadow of a person, and then quietly flashed into the night. Is being sneaky the spirit of a knight? Unexpectedly, at this time, Caesar waved his hand, and the shadow person who was about 10 meters away was directly blown up and disappeared. The doctor waved his hand as if nothing had happened, and said with a bright smile, Very good. If you're not going to do it, then I won't hold back. Mr. Clown's big smile appeared on his face, and with a swing of his hands, 8 throwing knives shot out at the same time. The speed of the throwing knives was not much slower than the speed of light of the weapons of the dragon riders. At this time, Caesar obviously did not intend to directly block or dodge like before. He staggered his body, as if he was dancing, and dodged through the gaps of the throwing knives. But how could the clown's attack be so powerful? He had already taken the initiative to attack. The clown, who was known as the strongest person at the Round Table of 12, obviously felt that his opponent was also a person with a strong body, so he wanted to compete with strength. The kind of fight where fists were shot out like bullets, causing waves to roll around, and punches and kicks could crack the earth. Undoubtedly, it was a big blow to the members of the Fianna at the edge. We are going to surpass this group of people? Night mechanism. It's just one person, and it's hard to tell who's the winner. They did not care about the reaction of the group of survivors. Geraint was a little surprised and said, This is the first time I've seen it. This guy's strength is almost the same as the clown's. The clown's body is at the level of abnormal. It's really surprising. No wonder he has the courage to cause trouble in our territory. I'm also a little itchy. Gareth smiled bitterly in his heart. That's because you haven't seen the one in the prison on the island. The clown did not even manage to block a punch, and directly fell to the ground and fainted. Suddenly, Caesar and the clown separated again. It seemed that neither side could do anything to the other. The clown suddenly changed into a crying face, but his expression was ecstatic. "What an interesting opponent! Let me be happier. The crazier you are, the stronger you will be. Instead of saying that you're a just knight, it's better to say that you're a crazy knight." Caesar shook his head. "I'm not interested in fighting with you. Are you planning to escape?" At some point in time, Geraint, the doctor, and Tresty had already moved to 3 different places behind Caesar, blocking his possible escape route. After seeing that Caesar could fight the clown who had already put on the holy armor, they did not dare to be careless. At this time, they had already put on their own holy armor at the same time. At this time, Caesar's hands were hanging down, and he slowly exhaled. At the same time, he faced 5 members of the Round Table of 12, but his face was fearless. "Then let's try the so-called power of the holy armor. It will surprise you." The clown narrowed his eyes at this time, and when he was about to throw the flying knife, his body suddenly froze on the spot. At this time, a strange feeling came from his holy armor. Not only him, but the other 4 members of the Round Table of 12 also felt this strangeness at this time. Their eyes couldn't help but shrink, and they looked at the wave emitted from Caesar's body in disbelief. The wave of the holy armor. The power of inheritance of the Round Table of 12 actually resonated at this time. A black and purple light flashed on Caesar's body at this time, but in an instant a black armor covered Caesar's body. "Lancelot du Lake and indestructible lake light?" Gareth muttered to himself. How is this possible?" At this time, Caesar casually waved the indestructible lake light in his hand, and the sword wind instantly tore the air, directly tearing a big hole dozens of meters long on the ground. "Come on, Knights of the Round Table," Caesar said softly. Mr. Clown's head was buzzing at this time, and he finally understood the real meaning of the so-called "test the power of the holy armor" mentioned by this doomsday mythical leader. He felt that at this time, a voice sounded in his head at the same time. It seemed to ask him, "Are you surprised? Are you surprised?" Chapter 1302. In the manner of Sir Hopkins. When Caesar, who was wearing the Illat de Lake inherited holy armor, appeared on the screen, half of the people in charge of the Knight organization stood up in fright. "Please tell me this is just a joke, Lancelot." They all looked at Sir Hopkins and saw that his eyes were also uncertain. Obviously, he didn't expect such a situation to happen. There was no such thing as forging a similar armor and bluffing. These people at least had the eyesight to distinguish the holy armor. Sir Hopkins quickly came to a decision. He immediately gave an order to the 12 knights at the scene. "We must keep him alive. He may have mastered the method of taking away the sacred armor from the inherited knight. We must not let this method leak out." No one questioned Sir Hopkins's orders. The inheritance of the 12 Knights of the Round Table was the foundation of the Knight organization since ancient times, and the method of inheritance had always been carried out in secret. It was like someone inventing a highly secure virtual currency, but hackers could dig deep into this gold mine and mine the currency as they wished. "Got it." Knight Gareth's finger temporarily turned off the communication device in his ear and nodded, then he calmed himself down as fast as he could. "Everyone, it seems that now is not the time to be polite. The Knight organization has already given the order. We must capture Oberon dead or alive." As expected, Knight Geraint was the first to react, then he waved his hands, and a huge knight's lance appeared in his hands. Although the 12 Knights of the Round Table were fighting against an enemy who had used some unknown method to seize the power of the 12 Knights of the Round Table from Lancelot, overall, they were not afraid. A formation of 12 Knights fighting at the same time was very rare. Was it a problem of cooperation and tacit understanding? Impossible, They were all warriors who had experienced hundreds of battles and had an unimaginable amount of combat experience, so they could adapt to the situation as if it was instinct. When Gareth, Clown, Geraint, and Tresty attacked Caesar at the same time, the doctor was slightly slower. A shadow man quietly appeared behind him again, and then blended into the night. At this time, facing the siege of 4 members of the 12 Round Table at the same time, Caesar could not detect the appearance of the shadow man like before. After releasing the shadow men, the doctor joined the battle immediately. With the addition of the doctor in the latter half of the fight, Caesar felt as if the pressure on him had increased tremendously. His attitude of easily annihilating the F was no longer present. You must record their data. Although the operation this time has failed, the information on this group of Knights of the Round Table has always been very scarce. We must not miss anything. In the control room of the F headquarters, the Prime Minister, who had recovered slightly from the shock, gritted his teeth and gave orders to the survivors present. This was the only thing he could do at the moment, even if he was unwilling to do so. Unexpectedly, not only did they see the secret weapon of the British government, but they also saw 5 members of the 12 Round Table at once. Today is a day of celebration. Looks like. Comrade Little Wong, you've recorded it well. These Knights of the Round Table rarely make a move, and it's even rarer for 5 of them to be deployed at once. This is a great contribution. I know. Just as Caesar was fighting fiercely with the knights, the shadow men had quietly sneaked into the monastery. They passed through room after room at the fastest speed. However, they could only find an unconscious old priest trapped in a room. They could not find the whereabouts of Her Majesty the Queen at all. Finally, they came to the stone room used for imprisonment. When they saw the traces of the stone room, they understood that the Queen had been transferred here, and probably not too long ago. Is she trying to stall for time, so she stayed here alone? The shadow men rescued the old priest and sent him away. After that, they returned to the doctor. When they brought back this information, the doctor could not help but frown. On the battlefield, Caesar stood alone, and they had no one. Although they were not evenly matched, it was obvious that they would not be easily defeated. This ability to control the sacred armor set off waves in the hearts of these knights who had gone through countless trials and tribulations to inherit the sacred armor. When they found out that the Queen had been transferred away and that there was no one left in the monastery, Mr. Clown smashed half of the monastery with a punch, and the battle between them escalated. Every attack was as powerful as an RPG missile. With the monastery as the epicenter, they began to wantonly destroy everything in their surroundings. According to their orders, the few survivors who had been recording the battle felt their scalps go numb. The dragon cavalry also had weapons that could release such power, but they needed to be recharged and there was a cooldown period after use. It was impossible for them to casually release it like this. In fact, their speed had already surpassed the maximum speed that the Dragon Rider's armor thrusters could reach, and yet, they were still moving nimbly, able to turn at will. What was the purpose of our so-called adjustment and training in the past few years? One of them smiled bitterly and muttered to himself. At the same time, he could not help but have a despairing thought. If the non-humans in the world were to suddenly become active instead of being silent, would humans be able to resist them? One had to know that the 23 members of the Sacred Armor had gone through many rounds of selection and countless years of investment in manpower and resources to obtain their current combat ability. However, just one Oberon was able to effortlessly wipe them out as if it was child's play, and he did not even use his full strength at that time. No one cared about the bitterness in the hearts of the Sacred Armor members. Everyone's gazes were focused on this dangerous battle at this moment. The aftermath of the battle had reached hundreds of meters away from the monastery. However, these hundreds of meters were just a narrow stage for Caesar and the other 5 people at the Round Table. They could reach each other in an instant. How troublesome! Tresty, who was wearing a heavy armor, had no choice but to stop. Strictly speaking, speed was not his specialty. He was not like the clown who had a powerful physical body and superhuman senses, nor did he have Gareth's exquisite sword skills, nor was he like the doctor who was good at controlling agility. Tresty was better at defending and counterattacking. The heavy shield in his hand gave him the strongest defense, and he could accurately deliver a fatal blow behind the shield. Geraint, we can't drag this out any longer. I will raise the shield and release your strength to your heart's content. Tresty suddenly shouted. This was like a signal. In an instant, the doctor, Gareth, and the clown abruptly gave up on attacking Caesar. Instead, they all flashed and appeared behind Tresty. When Tresty raised the shield and stabbed it into the ground, a huge shield of light appeared at this moment. I have been waiting for you to say this. At this time, Geraint straightened the huge knight's spear in his hand. Starting from the top, the spear began to crack section by section. Then, a circular array with a diameter of more than 3 meters and filled with all kinds of strange characters appeared at the tip of the spear, spinning wildly. A terrifying power gathered on Geraint's spear. Even Caesar felt a sense of danger. Under the purple-black holy armor, Caesar frowned, but at the same time, he raised the indestructible lake light in his hand. On the blade of the sword, lines of characters similar to those on Geraint's spear began to appear. Elven engraving. Caesar directly slashed out with his sword. At the same time, Geraint's spear released a huge shock wave at the same time. Tearing and destroying collided with the air. Just the airflow produced by the collision of the two forces was like a hurricane. The leg armor of the Dragon Knight had already extended, but the impact of the collision was even more powerful and directly overturned the soil. They had to rely on the thrust of the thrusters and turn on the auxiliary intelligence to maintain the balance of their bodies in this turbulent airflow. The light covered the night sky. Even if it was just the suburbs, the city had probably noticed it at this time. But obviously this was not the time to consider the impact. All eyes were fixed on the center of the terrifying impact. Did they defeat the leader of the myth of Doomsday? After the aftermath, the monastery no longer existed. What appeared in front of them was a deep crater with a diameter of nearly 100 meters. Everything had been annihilated, except for the shield that Tresty had erected on the ground, as well as the complete and long piece of land behind him. Of course, there was also Knight Gareth, the clown, and the doctor. Is he dead? Geraint appeared to be panting at this time. On the huge knight's spear in both hands, billowing steam was emitting. The air was distorted in a large area. The holy armor on his body peeled off in a large area, leaving only the parts on his arms and legs, but he suddenly shouted, "Be careful, he is not dead yet." Along with Geraint's shout, a figure slowly walked out of the thick billowing steam. Caesar was still holding the indestructible lake light in his hand. When he walked, the sound of the sacred armor clashing against each other was especially loud in the night. He was not unscathed. At least the holy armor on his head was broken, revealing half of his face. At the same time, there were several crisscrossing cracks on the breastplate. Seeing this, Geraint raised his weapon again, and the clown and the others also walked out of the huge shield. The battle was not over yet. Well, it's almost time. Cass looked up at the night sky at this time. The clouds moved, and a bright moon hung high in the sky. Are you going to give up resistance? Mr. Clown smiled strangely and narrowed his eyes at the same time. Caesar slowly shook his head, suddenly looked at the helicopter that sent the knights here, and said indifferently, "I said, you have to give me an answer before tomorrow's sunrise. The time is not up yet, but you don't seem to follow the rules of the game. Since you intend to break the rules of the game, I don't mind adding some other elements to this game." With that, Caesar suddenly dispersed the indestructible lake light in his hand, along with the holy armor on his body. At the back of the body there was a surge of movement. After that, a pair of wings, that looked like huge palms but were connected to a blood-colored membrane spread out just like that. While everyone was bewildered, Caesar rushed into the night sky. The moment he stood under the bright moon, a loud whistling sound came out from his mouth. He opened his hands in the sky and shouted towards the sky. The loud whistling sound even resounded through the sky, long and endless. What does he want to do? Mr. Gareth frowned. But at this time, a scream came. The few members of the F, at the edge of the sky, were painfully covering their heads at this time. They were in extreme pain. The voice was filled with anger and sorrow. Even Gareth and the others felt dizzy at this moment. They felt that their bodies had become uncoordinated. And this whistling sound gradually spread to the night sky of the entire Fog City, on the streets of Fog City. The moment this horrible sound came, the glass cabinets of the shops on the street broke one after another. Suddenly, a pedestrian fell to the ground while holding his head in pain. "What happened to you?" A few passers-by came over and checked with concern. But the moment they turned over the man who fell to the ground, they saw that the man's eyes were scarlet. His teeth became sharp, and his whole body began to crazily grow brownish-black hair. In the blink of an eye, this man turned into a huge werewolf more than 2 meters tall. Roar! After turning into a huge werewolf, he suddenly pounced on the passers-by beside him and began to bite them. In the office, a programmer who was typing on the keyboard was now foaming at the mouth. But his body also began to uncontrollably mutate. He looked at his reflection on the screen in horror and finally fell to the ground. Suddenly, a huge claw stretched out and grabbed the table. It stood up. What the heck? In the street, the patrolling police car stopped, and a policeman walked out, looking up at the sudden terrifying changes on the street. The fire, the thick smoke, the figure climbing on the outer wall of the building, the crowd screaming in fear as they fled, the chaotic mess of vehicles crashing into each other, the fallen fire hydrant that was splashing water, and the Hyundai car that was being held up by a monstrous thing in the traffic jam. Sub. The policeman suddenly shivered, remembering the communication device in the police car, and returned to the car while trembling. But the moment he opened the door, he was met with a pair of scarlet eyes. His patrol partner had turned into a monster with thick hair, and directly pounced on him. Social Work Center. Miss Ork suddenly hugged her head and curled up on the ground. Olga, who was holding a guitar and learning from Will, suddenly stood up absent-mindedly. Under everyone's surprised gaze, he walked to the window and looked up at the full moon. His pupils began to turn into vertical slits, emitting bits of gold. Suddenly, Olga fell to the ground and fainted. Miss Ork painfully stood up, as if she was enduring some kind of pain. Finally, she grabbed a pair of scissors and fiercely stabbed into her arm. She seemed to be better, even though blood began to flow down her arm. However, this scene alarmed everyone present. Only to hear a commotion outside the Social Work Center, and it seemed like there was a car crash on the street. Song Dynasty Hotel. Kitchen. Clang! The sound of the frying pan falling to the ground was heard. The steak on the frying pan was still medium rare, and the fragrance of the butter, and meat juice mixed together was still released. But at this time, the chef retreated step by step in horror. Finally, he had no way to go, and his body was pressed against the wall. With a trembling voice, the chef said in horror, "AI. Ayak?" In front of him, there was a huge green thing that broke the chef's clothes, with fangs sticking out of its mouth and a hooked nose. The whole city was in an uproar. Top load next, you. Chapter 1303. Under the moonlight, Caesar, who was covered in a hazy layer of moonlight, flapped his strange fleshy wings that were like palms. His body also floated up and down slightly. He had stopped the terrifying whistling sound and was looking at the ground with cold eyes. After the terrifying sound stopped, the Knights of the Round Table didn't feel dizzy anymore. It didn't seem to be a sound wave attack. However, they couldn't be sure if it brought any hidden dangers. After all, this was a thug who had seized the power of the holy armor by some unknown means. No one knew what special effects were hidden in this whistling sound. Gareth and the others were motionless at this time, trying to cope with the changes by remaining unchanged. However, as time passed, the surroundings were as usual. Except for the wind becoming colder, it seemed that this whistling sound didn't really bring any spiritual harm. Caesar was still loftily floating in the air like a king, looking down at the ground. At this time, the doctor suddenly frowned, and his expression changed drastically. He even blurted out, "What did you say? The Fog City is rioting? What happened?" The other four people looked at the doctor one after another. His expression was solemn. At the same time, he looked up at Caesar under the moonlight, gritted his teeth, and said, "Now, in all the districts of the Fog City, those registered orcs are in a state of frenzy and are destroying everywhere. Look." The doctor pointed into the distance at this time, which was the direction of the Fog City. Everyone looked over and saw little sparks rising up at this time. Half of the city had been dyed red, and even on several tall buildings, raging flames could be seen. "It's his whistling sound." In an instant, they realized the real purpose of Caesar's action at the same time. "Oberon! You actually—" In the night, Caesar was like an actor who was about to take a curtain call on the stage. He bowed slightly. "Then, please enjoy the special performance I have prepared for you. You want to escape." Gareth stabbed the sword toward the sky crazily. At this time, Caesar took out a strange scroll from who knows where. After opening it, when the sword light arrived, what was stabbed was only his afterimage. He had already disappeared. "What do we do now?" Everyone gathered again. Mr. Gareth said with a solemn expression, "As far as I know, there are about 300 TV series with orc bloodline registered in the Fog City. If we let these guys continue to destroy, I'm afraid that the Fog City will. 300 orcs with their bestial nature in a bustling city, the destructive power they brought could be imagined." Bang 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 bang. On the street, the sound of bullets being fired was so loud. The fire spread on the sidewalk, and overturned cars could be seen everywhere. At this time, the police of Fog City were building a parking lot with police cars. More than a dozen Fog City police officers were using the police cars as cover, madly shooting at a huge object nearly 5 meters in front of them. The bullets pierced through the giant creature's body. Blood gushed out, but it did not stop the terrifying creature's destructive actions. Instead, it aroused its ferocious nature. It became even more violent. Fangs like that of a wild boar protruded from its lower jaw. When it opened its mouth, it looked like the teeth of a demon. It tore the door of the car next to it and used it as a shield. Then, it continued to move forward. The standard pistols used by the Fog City's police officers couldn't stop its advance at all. Suddenly, it leaped high into the air and landed heavily on top of the police car. Its huge weight instantly pressed down on the car, shattering the glass of the police car window. It bent down and roared again. A Fog City's police officer was so scared that he collapsed on the ground, trembling in horror. Similar situations were happening on the streets of many places. It was like the end of the world. The Fianna headquarters control room. Mr. Prime Minister slammed his fist on the table. He stared angrily at what was happening on the screen. He gritted his teeth, his eyes full of resentment, and his voice seemed to be saying something. "Oberon, Mr. Prime Minister, several ministers called you at the same time. In addition, there are military generals. Who do you want to respond to first? Call all the major TV stations and communication operators for me." The Prime Minister stood up quickly. "I want to stop all information transmission in Fog City within 10 minutes. 5 minutes. This. Do you want the outside to be as chaotic as here?" The Prime Minister said angrily. "I don't have the time to care about how to deal with the outside world. What I need is to stop this riot." "I understand." The officer nodded quickly, but the calls from the ministers and military leaders were still ear-piercing. Then these calls? Hang up. The Prime Minister took a deep breath. Also, connect me to Sir Hopkins's phone. When the communication between the Fianna headquarters and the Knights organization in Sir Hopkins's manor was connected, both sides saw the ugly expressions on each other's faces. The Prime Minister was surprised to see the people in charge of the Knights organization sitting in front of the huge round table. He frowned. After a few seconds of silence, Sir Hopkins took the lead and said, "Mr. Prime Minister, it seems that the place where you are should be commanding those strange armored soldiers." "Hopkins," the Prime Minister said in a deep voice, "I'm not in the mood to quarrel with you here, and it's not the time. I've already mobilized the army for the riot in Fog City, and I need the help of your Knights organization. Tell me, how many of these monsters are there in Fog City?" "They're orcs." Sir Hopkins stood up and said, "Or they're mixed-blood descendants of orcs and humans. They're not monsters. Your Knights organization actually allows these monsters to intermarry with humans?" The Prime Minister's eyes widened, and then he restrained the anger in his heart. "Forget it, it's not the time to care about this. Tell me the number. If this kind of violence is grouped, then the approximate number should be about 340. 340. How many things haven't you told the cabinet?" Sir Hopkins said indifferently, "Our Knights organization is also quite interested in those soldiers who have powerful weapons." The Prime Minister was silent for a while, then he gritted his teeth and said, "How many people can you send? Are you sure you can suppress these monsters, orcs? I don't want the army's artillery to face this city. You're in charge of evacuation and rescue." Sir Hopkins took a deep breath and said, "We'll suppress this riot as soon as possible." "Very good. I don't want to see any orcs leave Fog City. This is just like a plague." The screen turned off. Everyone at the round table looked at Hopkins. The old knight sighed and waved his hand, saying, "Order all the knights to move out. As long as they still have the ability to fight, they should move out no matter where they are. Everyone, I'll have to trouble you to transfer some people from your organization as soon as possible." This time, they were escorting the key of the Holy Grail to Fog City. Although there were 12 knights guarding them, in fact, there weren't many knights accompanying them. Everyone looked solemn, nodded, and left the conference room one after another. They each went to command the organizations in their jurisdiction. Only Sir Hopkins and the great knight with the magic sword, Simpton, were left here. Sir Hopkins suddenly asked, "How many souls are left on the magic sword?" Simpton replied expressionlessly, "The information obtained from activating the Holy Grail has been used up. It's used up so much." Sir Hopkins pondered for a moment, then said seriously, "Mr. Simpton, we need more sacrifices. Only the power of the Holy Grail can erase the effects of this riot. Come forward." Great Knight Simpton directly walked forward and knelt in front of Sir Hopkins with one knee. He lightly pressed the staff in his hand on the knight's shoulder. "Knight, I give you the glory, please bring us light." "Yes, my lord." This might be the most unbelievable day of my life, Will thought. He was at a loss of what to do with the chaos outside. The signal seemed to have been cut off in an instant. Not only could he not connect to any network, but he couldn't even connect to the phone. There was also no signal on the TV. It was as if he was disconnected from the whole world in an instant. His friend was still anxiously trying to make a call. Will's face was a little pale, and his hands were just moving mechanically. He was bandaging the wound on Ms. Orc's arm. Although he didn't know why she was hurting herself, it seemed like she was using this method to relieve some kind of pain. After Olga suddenly fainted, he was held in Ms. Orc's arms. It seemed like he didn't wake up. Instead, Mr. Klein was talking to someone on the phone. "Why can your phone still be connected? This is specially made by our agency. It uses a private channel." Klein quickly turned around and said, "Now all the communication outside has been cut off. It's very chaotic. I'm sorry, I can't explain it to you in an instant. Please don't leave here because it's very dangerous outside. I know it's very dangerous. Looking out of the window, there was a fire in a building not far away, and there were smashing sounds outside the street. One of Will's friends suddenly trembled. Perhaps it was a subconscious action, but when he looked at Ms. Ork again, there was a trace of fear in his eyes. He even couldn't help but take half a step back. At this moment, a violent collision sounded from the entrance of the social work center. Klein's face changed, and after telling everyone to stay, he hurriedly rushed out. When Klein rushed to the entrance of the social work center, he saw a car had directly crashed into the lobby. The car kept shaking. Inside the car, he saw a black man with an eye patch, who was currently being pressed to the seat by something. He was holding on to his own body, and his hands were desperately resisting the huge arm of the other party. Nick! Klein was shocked, and he opened the door and kicked the huge object out of the other side of the car door. At the same time, he dragged Nick out of the car door. I don't know why this orc suddenly went crazy on the way here. Nick panted and said hurriedly. All the orcs in the city are going crazy. Klein said quickly, for the details, you can see the announcement on the agency's intranet. Now, protect yourself first. Because at this moment, the orc that was kicked out had already stood up again, its clothes were already tattered, and only a few pieces of cloth were left hanging on its body. It was almost 2 meters tall, and its arms were much thicker than a normal person's legs. It had sharp claws and fangs, and its whole body was emitting a ruthless aura. Klein took a few deep breaths. He didn't bring any weapons with him, so it wouldn't be easy to deal with a crazy orc with his bare hands. There's spare equipment in the trunk of the car. Nick, I love you! Klein cried out in surprise. He stood up from the front of the car and quickly kicked the orc. After knocking the orc away, he hurriedly took out a war hammer and a round shield from the trunk of the car. Like a foot fighter, Klein used the war hammer to hit the round shield a few times, making a sound to attract the orc's attention. Hey, big guy, do you like to eat apple pie? The orc was provoked and rushed out crazily. Klein dodged to the side and hit the round shield again at the same time. Big guy, over here! The orc roared angrily and rushed out crazily again. Klein dodged perfectly again, and the orc's body crashed directly into the wall behind Klein. The huge force caused the orc's upper body to directly smash through the wall, and its body was stuck in the wall. The moment it pulled its head out, the war hammer directly hit its face. The war hammer was infused with the powerful strength that the knights had cultivated for many years. When the hammer hit, it immediately woke up the orc and made it dizzy. But it obviously didn't lose the ability to move. Klein swung the war hammer again. But at this time, a figure blocked in front of him. The orc lady opened her hands and blocked in front of the orc. Move! On, please, please. He's very dangerous. The orc lady had to quickly take out her phone and quickly said a few words. This isn't his intention. He's just lost. He doesn't want to hurt anyone. I can calm him down, please believe me. Klein subconsciously looked at Nick, who was not far away. After the two of them quickly exchanged glances, Klein slowly nodded and then took a few steps back. But the war hammer and the round shield were still raised. After a short period of dizziness, the orc went berserk again. It didn't care who was in front of it and directly grabbed it with its hands. At this time, the orc lady nimbly dodged the orc's attack and held its face with both hands. Then she put her forehead on the orc's forehead and stared at the orc with her amber eyes. She said something in a low voice with a strange rhythm. It was like a language, but also like a song. But miraculously, this berserk orc seemed to have really calmed down. Klein and Nick looked at each other again and couldn't help but frown. The alarm sounded all of a sudden. Outside the window, the city began to appear. Looking down from the suite on the upper floor of the Song Dynasty Hotel, the city seemed to be suffering from the flames of war. Luocha looked at it silently. At this time, the door of the suite suddenly opened. The servant girl walked in slowly with a man in ragged clothes. The man was unconscious, but his ragged clothes could vaguely be seen that it should be a chef's uniform when it was intact. "Master, I brought him back." The servant girl threw him on the ground. There should only be this in the hotel. Luochu nodded. When he looked outside again, he suddenly said, "Do you think this is the third time?" Obviously, they were already in the hotel room,